the rates at the same level. So we are definitely going in the right direction. As I said, that test positivity is a leading indicator for hospitalizations. So here's our peak towards the end of November at 150 plus patients. At this time, we also had more than 40 patients in our intensive care units with COVID-19 and more than 30 on ventilators with COVID-19. And this has been a pretty steady downwards move since then. So again, here is where the restrictions, mid-January, the restrictions for everything except the mask came off, and we didn't see a surge as a result of that. We would have seen that probably 2 to 3 weeks later. So sometime end of January, 1st of February. The removal of the mask requirement was February 12th, so it's too early to see that. But if you kind of slide our way back here, we can go all the way back to where we now with about 30-ish or even in the 20s for hospital inpatients. If you go all the way back to August, we were above that. So you have to get back into the summer to have the inpatient rates we're seeing right now. We continue to see that about, give or take a little bit, about half the patients and inpatients for COVID-19 are Yellowstone County residents, about half are non-Yellowstone County residents. It wiggles around that number a little bit, but it's pretty steady for us. This is something that does represent a little bit of a change. These are the cases involving children and youth age 19 and under. This is when school started back here at the end of August, and you can see from that time, we've sort of talked about this, we sort of lived in this 12 to 15% range pretty steadily. The week ending February 6th, that jumped up to about 17%. The week ending February 13th, that was about 22%. So we're watching this. We're a little concerned about this, but it's too early to know if we're really seeing a trend or if we're just seeing sort of an artifact or just a sort of a chance shift in the case mix. But with our schools open and reduced restrictions, we will watch this very carefully because we really, we've done a really good job of keeping our schools open and safe, and we want that to continue. If we look at all cases, you can see, again, school started, we were about 10.5%. Now we're up to about 13.5%. So we've seen a slow increase, but nothing dramatic. We'll watch this carefully. And this is something new that we've added now that we're getting good vaccination data. So this is Yellowstone County. We've delivered just over 30,000 doses of vaccine in Yellowstone County. About shade over 10,000 people are fully vaccinated, meaning they've had 2 doses, and a shade under 10,000 are partially vaccinated, so they received 1 dose. This will get to be a little more tricky when we have single dose vaccines, but right now the math is pretty simple in terms of who's fully vaccinated and who's partially. And then this last one looks at the percent of the population of Yellowstone County that is presumptively immune, meaning that they have had 2 doses of vaccine, or in some cases, they are they've been known to be infected. They've had a positive test. So right now, we've got about 16,000 people who are known to be positive at some point in the past 11 months. We've got about 10,000 that have received 2 doses of the vaccine. There's probably some overlap in this, so this is not something that you want to take out to like 3 decimal places. This is just a sort of a guideline for us. If you look on the left, you'll see that we're sitting right about 16% of the population. In order for us to be having a meaningful conversation about what's called herd immunity or population protection is probably a better term, this total needs to be up somewhere in the range of 70%. So that's 110-ish thousand people. So we continue to encourage people, very strongly encourage people to maintain the protective preventive measures like masking, maintaining distance, hand hygiene, sanitation of surfaces, avoiding large crowds, all those kinds of things we still need to do because we are a long way from that level 5 deaths a year. We're now at the 11-month mark. Our first case was March 13th, 2020, so we're at 11 months now. We have just under 16,000 COVID-19 cases confirmed, 230 deaths. So our death rate is crept up a little bit. It's at 1.4% in Yellowstone County. Compared to the total of 5 years, so this entire total, we've got 2.9 times as many cases and 10 times as many deaths in 11 months as we saw in 5 years, and a death rate that's 3.5 times what we saw for 5 years of influenza. If we compare the 11 months of COVID-19 to an average flu year, you can see 14.5 times as many cases, 46 times the number of deaths in 11 months compared to an average flu year, and a death rate of 2.8 times what we're seeing in flu. So I guess the short answer is we are doing better. We're seeing fewer cases. We're seeing a lower test positivity rate. We're certainly seeing less burden on the healthcare systems. Our ability to keep up with case investigation, contact tracing is certainly way better. We continue to have some concerns related to, what happens as people are more active and less concerned about masking. We continue to strongly encourage people to wear their masks and follow all the other preventive measures, and hopefully we can hold on with those prevention measures long enough to get a lot of people vaccinated. We do anticipate we'll see more vaccine coming into the community, and at some point we hope to have some the single dose vaccines will get approved and become available. So we're making progress, but we, as I said before, we just need to be patient for a while longer. So with that, Mayor, I will stop and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the good news. And again, thank you for your hard work and the whole community that has pitched in to bring these numbers down. Let me ask the obvious question, which is about masking. We've received some emails, not a lot, but some advocating for a city-wide or county-wide mask mandate. I'm sure you've received a similar request to issue an order through your powers as county health officer. What are you thinking about that? And if you don't favor that right now, when what might be the set of circumstances or trigger points that would cause our community to need to, if not go down that path, at least consider going down that path? And maybe here you could touch on the issue of variants and what our risks are there or are not.
Yeah. So at this point, when we start talking about imposed restrictions, I think we have to be careful of that because it does begin to obviously infringe on people's freedom of movement and activity. So at this point, no, there's no intention of doing anything locally, and we're following the governor's guidance. I tend to shy away from sort of a hard line at this number, we do something, because these are fluid measures. So, if you look at, for instance, the week in at the end of January, where through a reporting issue, we added a whole bunch of cases. If that would have triggered that mark, what would we have done? So I think what we have to watch is what's happening with vaccinations, what's happening in terms of the ability to keep schools open, where are cases coming from. We're continuing to do case investigation and contact tracing, which means we're watching for clusters. Are there clusters tied to particular activities or groups? In terms of the variants, I think we all understand that it's not a matter of if, but when variants are identified in our community. They could be here now. We don't routinely check every case to determine if it's if there's a do the type of analysis required to determine if it's a variant. To some extent, it doesn't necessarily matter a whole lot, quite honestly, because there is no definitive treatment. So that we're still talking about prevention, and prevention for the variants is the same as prevention for the original virus. We certainly anticipate that we'll see variants. It's what viruses do. It's kind of their job, if you will. So at this point, I think what we need to do is, the governor campaigned on a very clear message, and he was elected by a significant majority. And that message was, we can depend on ourselves to keep our community safe. So, I think the governor has certainly earned the right to manage this pandemic in his way. If things get particularly difficult in our community, then we do have some local options available to us. We've talked before with other health officers. Some of the challenges in being kind of the hub community and a hub and spoke situation is people come in and out of our community a lot from the region. So it's difficult if you can't control the whole state. I think most of us, or a lot of us, I should say, in public health, believe that having a statewide base of, if we're going to have restrictions, makes more sense than sort of a hit and miss community by community. So, and the other thing I'd say is my experience from 11 months of this is you hear from people who are concerned about their own personal situation. So I can assure you that there are a whole bunch of people writing me, and maybe you as well, saying, whatever you do, don't do a mask mandate. We should never do that. And then we have people writing saying, whatever you do, be sure and do a mask mandate. The belief that there is unanimity or even consistency among the beliefs and recommendations of our community, it's just not true. Some of us hear from all sides. And I can tell you, I've gotten a number of messages about masking on both sides of the equation. So I think making our decisions, it has to be on what's going on in the community and not necessarily just who's making the most noise.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Ronning and Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you. Hey, John, thank you for the presentation. Now that the vaccination is in a centralized location, for those members of the Billings community that are aged, they're mature, they might be in their 80s or more, and they wear hearing aids or things like that, those larger rooms like we see out at Metro can be really intimidating because you hear so much background noise. It's hard to hear the people that are close to you, as well as a number of people that are in their 80s are not necessarily computer literate. What types of communication is available to those that are of the older population that may be intimidated by trying to make an appointment online and are absolutely intimidated of going out to Metro? So
we do set aside a proportion of the doses that are not in the online registration time. So we have those folks can respond by phone and schedule by phone. Right now, I think we're trying to get as much vaccine out as quickly as we can. We do know that two pharmacies are getting 100 doses each. That will be a quieter area. When we have sufficient doses, we'll start sending them out to medical practices so that people can go to their own doctor's office. There's also more will go to more pharmacies. There's a number of places that are registered as vaccine distribution sites. Right now, because the doses are limited, they're really coming primarily to Riverstone Health, Billings Clinic, and St. Vincent Healthcare, and we're putting those out largely in the larger centralized clinics. That will change over time. I think it's to some extent it's sort of the same situation you've gotten with the question about masking. There's a lot of different opinions. I also hear from the people that say, why are you wasting your time with telephones when it's so much easier to register online? It becomes trying to come up with a plan that really accommodates all needs is pretty difficult. Again, that will get easier as we have more vaccine and we have more sites available besides the large ones.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. John, I just wanted to say that I received my shots at the Billings Clinic in their main lobby, and my wife received hers at the Mansfield at St. Vincent's. And I was thoroughly impressed with the efficiency, the care that the people gave. It was wonderful, and it was very timely. So more kudos to the hospitals for doing a good job.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, one of the things that I think some people sometimes forget is, as a community, we've been doing vaccination clinics a long time. Going back to, we've done a lot of flu shot challenges. We did the H1N1 in 2009. what we're able to do when we reduce down to the centralized clinics, and this was happening today because I was out there at Metro, all of us have slightly different takes on the theme, and so we're able to learn from one another and plan together and figure out what really worked well in one spot and build that into the shared work. We're fortunate in this community, and we really should not take for granted that we have a long history of collaborative healthcare in this community. And so we know each other, we're used to working together, and it really pays off at times like this.
Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. John, real quick, I know we talked a lot about the vaccination, but people are still getting sick. What has or is anything changed in the testing sites? Can you kind of review that? So if people need to go get tested, what they need to do?
Yeah, so we still have, for Riverstone Health, we have the testing site at Overland Avenue, 2179 Overland Avenue. That we can do, we're testing anyone who comes in, whether they're symptomatic or asymptomatic. We have access to rapid tests, rapid antigen tests, as well as the PCR tests. The hospitals also have their own testing systems as well. We are seeing a reduction in the number of tests being done. That is kind of predictable in that the disease prevalence is dropping. So there's fewer people who are ill and seeking testing. That was what allowed us to open up testing for asymptomatic as well. So there also, Yellowstone Pathology has some testing capacity. They're doing work. A number of clinics have access to testing. So for our clinic patients, we have a rapid test that tests for COVID-19 as well as influenza A, influenza B, and RSV. So it's much easier to get a test now than what we saw early on. We're seeing sort of the same thing in vaccination that we saw in testing, which is a very, very high demand early on and not enough supply to keep up with it. So on the vaccination side, I know you were talking testing here, but on the vaccination side, as we get more vaccine in town, we'll start to kind of normalize that supply versus demand levels as we did with testing earlier.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Treaky.
Are the current tests capable of identifying the variants?
Not in town, but they can be sent out, and some tests are, some cases are being tested for the variants. It's not 100% of tests that are. So, for instance, the antigen test doesn't test for it, but we can send them out and have the testing done of the genetic material determine if there is variants. That is happening, but we haven't seen any yet.
So follow-up. So basically what you're saying is that some of the tests that are currently going on right now, some random number or whatever, are being checked for the variant.
Yes.
Just to make sure that it's going on. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. While we wrap up with any questions here, let's open up for public comment as we conclude this item. That phone number is 237-6196. So if anybody is out there watching, please feel free to call that, and our clerk will tell us when we have a call or if we have any. Councilmember Purington, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. So, John, I have a couple of questions, actually. The first one has to do with that second vaccine. How many are you finding are not returning for that second vaccine? Are you contacting them via phone, email to remind them?
Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, just the other part of that question is, how long do they have between vaccines to make it viable or efficient?
So we do follow up with people. Most people come back very happily to get their second dose. It's pretty uncommon that we're not seeing second doses happening. The official answer is it's plus or minus 4, either 21 or 28 days, plus or minus 4. You may recall that early on, even Dr. Fauci was talking about maybe we should do them later to get more people at least have an initial dose. So because the vaccines are so new and all the phase 3 trials were done at that proper 28 or 21 day period, there's not a lot of data on what happens if you get it late. beyond the plus or minus 4 days. So there's just not a lot of data on that yet.
Okay, follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So, John, the other question that I had was related to one of your last slides there, is that to this point, and I guess we're halfway into, well, we're not halfway into the new year, but into 2021, and there are no influenza cases. So how do you say that, at this point we don't have any influenza? This is usually a high flu season time. So how do we not say we don't have any flu?
Well, the answer for what is a flu case is the same as just for COVID, which means there's a positive test. So when people are being tested, so for instance, when we test viral patients in our clinic using the rapid test machine, it tests for influenza, and we've had no positives. There are surely cases of every disease that people don't get tested for, so you don't know they're positive. Typically by this time of year, so you take COVID out of the mix. What you normally see at this time of year is respiratory disease that matches the case definition, which is very similar between COVID and influenza, would be presumptively influenza. Right now, a lot of people are still being tested for COVID, and some of those folks are receiving follow-up influenza testing as well. We just haven't had a positive one pop yet.
Thank you. Denise, do we have anybody who's called 237-6196 for public comment?
No, Mayor, I've received no calls.
Okay, we'll close the public comment period then. And any final questions for John before we let him go? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. John, real quick on that chart that you were talking about, kind of keeping the graph to go up to the 70%. When you had, I think we were at 16 now, the amount that you're using for those who are vaccinated, or I'm sorry, that have got the disease, are you using it only like a 3-month period? Because I understand that the presumption is they're only good for 3 months. So is that the number you're using, or are you using the whole number of everyone?
Yeah. Right now, we're using the full number on the premise that if people get reinfected, what's typically seen is they have much milder cases because they quickly mount an immune response.
Got it.
And we'll likely see that. There's just no history to know when what's going to happen when people get reinfected, 6, 8, 10 months down the road, or when the fall comes and they get another dose. We just don't have enough information.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, John, again, thank you. And we hope when we see you in a month or so that you come back with even lower numbers. But
I hope so too.
Yes, all right. Thank you again. That then concludes item number 2, and we'll move on to item number 3, our fiscal year 2020 annual financial audit and the CAFR, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Our Finance Director, Andy Zeller, has that report and introduction. Andy.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Chris, I noticed you're unmuted. Did you want to jump in there? Or you?
Thanks, Andy. I'll just take a very brief second to say, if we weren't talking about good, clean information tonight, I could assure you, you would all be very, very animated and interested in what in the world is going on. So to the good news that you've gotten, and then the further depth we'd like to go in, I just want to thank Andy and his team for their great work throughout the year. So with that, Andy, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Again, good evening, Mayor and City Council. I know Chris is wrong. You are all equally excited and animated to get this report, regardless of whether there are findings or not. Normally, I'd introduce my staff, who actually does a lot of the work here, but this evening they aren't on the Zoom call, so just know they do all the heavy lifting here. Our auditor, Tyler Bryant from JCCS out of Helena, is here. He'll present the audit information. And then after that, I've got a few slides I put together based upon some emails this morning to kind of go over the CAFR itself in a little bit of detail, nothing too in-depth, but I did want to provide some information there. So with that, I will turn it over to Tyler.
Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I will do a quick screen share here and make sure you can see what I'm seeing. Does that look good for everybody there?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So as Andy stated, my name is Tyler Bryant. I'm a shareholder with JCCS based out of our Helena office. This is actually my 10th year now working on the city's audit. So got the decade in. So we're going to go over the June 30, 2020 audit, and we're going to have some quick notes, like I always do, just going over our timeline and our process within the audit, and touch on a few basic auditing principles throughout the presentation. So hopefully this will help a little bit more with the understandability, if you will, of what we do within the audit and the CAFR as well. And kind of like Andy said, he's going to go over some more kind of historical type information on the back end of this. What we present as the auditors is more so focused on the current year audit results. So just a little bit of again, intro into how we do the audit. So we begin the audit in around August and September, and we start that with some initial planning, and we do that with Andy, the finance director, and his staff. And at that time, we're performing risk analysis and finding ways where we can focus our audit on areas of higher risk or sensitivity. And we also have discussions on new accounting processes or procedures or new standards that need to be implemented for the fiscal year. And then we roll into our field work, which is typically October, November timeframe. We'll have a handful of our accountants or CPAs on site and working with the staff around the city to perform the various audit procedures and obtain our audit evidence. And within the field work, some of the major functions that we're doing are things like testing specific transactions, testing and reconciling account balances, conducting internal control discussions and interviews, and confirming account balances with banks and individuals and other government agencies. So then after we gain our audit evidence and we're comfortable with the financials overall, then it leads into our review of the CAFR, which is prepared by the finance staff. And we work through that through our typical issuance towards the end of December. Of course, this year, a little thing called COVID did force us to perform the audit remotely. But fortunately, we really had no issues with that. Fully able to adjust and complete the audit as anticipated. So going into the PowerPoint a little bit here. So this is the cover of the CAFR, just so you can kind of put a cover to the face of that deal. It's showcasing the new and improved logo and brand. Here's a list of the presentation items we're going to go over specific to the audit. Again, the CAFR, I think it was 264 pages this year. So it's a large, lengthy document. We can't go over every page, and you definitely wouldn't want that. So when you're looking at the CAFR, I just want to point out a couple areas that are extremely useful to spend some time just to gain a knowledge of the current situation. And those two sections are called MD&A, which is Management Discussion and Analysis. It's on pages 3 through 12, so it's about a 10-page read. And it's a great way to get an understanding of, in narrative form and some tables, just showing what's going on throughout the city. And then also, if you want to go a little bit further, there's the notes section. And this is on pages 27 through 111, a little bit more in depth, but provides a lot of detail into the different accounts and comparisons for prior years and things like that. It's very useful to get a deeper understanding. And then there's some other information in the statistical section. which is pages 188 to 216. And this is a good way to look at trends. It's basically showing 10 years worth of information and various statistics. So it's a good way to see some changes over time in number format. So back to the PowerPoint here. So this is just a picture of the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. This is submitted to the GFOA every year, and they provide this award if you meet their requirements as far as readability and making sure that you're following all the accounting guidelines that we need to. So City will be submitting this again for the current CAFR, and I believe 36 consecutive years that this has been awarded. This here is our independent auditor's report. I'm not going to read every word on this. It's a 2-page report at the beginning of the CAFR overall, just explaining responsibilities and opinions and some of the required language that goes with that. And this is the 2nd page of that report. And just to note, there is nothing on this on either page 1 or 2 of this report that's reporting anything in a negative light or anything like that. So all positives from an auditing perspective. So this is just a little summary, breaking down those first 2 pages of the report into something a little bit more simple. Basically, the responsibility of the financial statements are the City of Billings management. Our responsibility as the auditors is to express an opinion on the financial statements, and that's based upon our audit. And at the bottom of this, so in our opinion, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the position of the city as of June 30, 2020. That's an unmodified or clean audit opinion, and that's exactly what you want to see in an audit. So then we'll look at a few pages of the basic financial statements. When we say basic financial statements, it's more of a summary of a lot of the funds being wrapped up into a few schedules. So this, again, there'll be a lot of info here. We'll do a quick little summary slide to kind of show what this means in a second here. But this is the statement of net position as of June 30, 2020. It's breaking out all the various classifications of assets, liabilities, and net position through governmental activities and business type activities. So this is wrapping up the hundreds of funds that the city has basically into 2 columns, bringing it all together. This is the 2nd page of that statement of net position, just showing the deferred outflows and the net position, or kind of almost a net worth consideration there. So if I break this down into very simple terms, what we saw on those first 2 pages, we have total assets of $1,107 million as of June 30, 2020. It's a snapshot, it's a point in time. And the main things that are making up that balance are things like cash, investments, accounts receivables. But the main thing, the biggest driver in that is capital assets. Capital assets are things like buildings, roads, infrastructure, vehicles, equipment, those sorts of items. And we have total liabilities of $307.4 million. These are essentially items that are owed, right? So accounts payable, accrued wages, accrued interest, and the biggest number there is going to be different kinds of debt. So that debt's bonds, notes, pension liabilities, and things like that. Then essentially, if you take the difference between your assets and your liabilities, you end with a net position. If you equate this to like your personal situation, it'd be almost like a net worth. So the net position for the city was $808.7 million at June 30, 2020. And within that net position, it's classified based off some of the assets and things that are held in there. So just wanted to point out that a grand majority of that net position is invested in those capital assets that we discussed before. $641 million is in there, and those aren't things that you can necessarily sell or liquidate or anything like that of that nature. They're owned by the city, but not assets that can be used in a financial sense. Then there's a restricted portion, $75.5 million. Those are restrictions for things like capital assets that are being built or debt that's associated with them and things like that. And then there's the unrestricted portion. That's kind of the leftover. So in 2020, the unrestricted balance was $91.3 million. And that's about a $2 million decrease from the unrestricted portion that we saw at the end of 2019, 93.1. And just a note, so this unrestricted portion is a little bit inflated is not the right word, but it's at a higher level than it is through other points in time throughout the year. And that's mainly due to May tax payments just came in the door, and those will be spent pretty much over the next 5 months. So this number is a little bit higher right as those payments come in. And also there were pretty significant CARES Act funds that came in this particular year from the pass-through from the state of Montana, from the federal government. And that also was an increase of this number at that point in time. Okay, then this is our statement of activities. This is basically your income statement. And again, like we saw on the balance sheet, this is taking hundreds of funds and wrapping them up into different functions, programs, and different columns to show the expenses and the revenues that are associated with it. Not something that we can really look at without just spending a lot of time digging deep into it. So I broke this out as well into just a very simple summary. So for the fiscal year, which again is June 30, 2020, that 12-month period, the total revenue from all sources for the city of Billings was $241.5 million. This is made up of items such as charges for services, grants, contributions, property taxes, federal state shared revenue, and investment earnings. Those are the main drivers of that. Then, of course, there's expenses associated with that. And $202.7 million was the total expenses related to last fiscal year. And these are into areas such as the general government, public safety, public works, culture and recreation, solid waste, airport, water, wastewater, and a whole host of others. But those are kind of the main drivers of the city's expenses. So then you can take the difference between revenue and expenses, and that's your change in net position, almost like a net income, net loss kind of a deal. So there was an increase in net position of $38.8 million for the current year. And kind of like we've talked about many times, this is mainly attributable to increased capital assets, as a lot of those funds will come from government grant type sources. That all comes in as income. But the way that they're expensed is over multiple periods, sometimes up to 40 plus years. So we don't see the same expense that we do as on those items at the same point in time that we see the revenue. And that's just the way that accounting rules, that's how that works. So this change in net position is probably one of the better ways to judge the overall health of the city on a year-to-year basis. Okay, then on top of the regular audit, if you will, we do what's also called a single audit. And a single audit is specific work for federal funds. So federal grants, federal awards, they come with their own set of testing requirements and restrictions and whatnot as to how they need to be reported and tested. So in 2020, the city spent $23.4 million in grant funds during the fiscal year. That's a pretty substantial increase from the previous year. A lot of that was due to construction projects and funds flowing for those. But the CARES Act was also a major driver in 2020, which is obviously a first-time deal that hasn't been seen in the past. So between the CARES Act and the airport funds specifically, those were the largest grants and made up just over half of the total $23.4 million in expenditures. So as part of our audit for this single audit testing, we tested approximately $7 million worth of programs that are considered major. And we're happy to say that we didn't have any findings to report on those. Despite some of the crazy timing and everything that happened specifically with the CARES Act funds and how that was all put together from DC down to Montana and to the local cities and whatnot, that was well handled by the city and finance staff. Then we do a couple other procedures within the audit as well. These are called agreed upon procedures engagements. Basically, they're just different reports and testing that are required by specific agencies. We do these every year. So for the airport fund, what's called a PFC, Passenger Facility Charges Agreed Upon Procedures report is required. And through the state of Montana, they have a building permits fund specific test and report that's required to be done. So we completed those, and no major issues to report on any of that. So all went smoothly there as well. And that is a quick, brief summary of the overall audit procedures and a quick highlight of the 2020 CAFR. So I'd open it up to any questions or comments that anybody has at this time.
Great. Thank you very much, Tyler. Much appreciated. Why don't we get you to close your screen if we can, and then we can see everybody else who's out there. Andy, before we open it up for questions, did you have anything you wanted to add before we ask for the council to weigh in?
No, Mayor. Why don't we go ahead and ask any questions of Tyler that may exist, and then if necessary, we can go into my presentation. He covered much of what I was going to go over, but we can run through some high level stuff if we need to.
Okay, great. Why don't we open up for any questions for Tyler, and then we'll turn it back to Andy for any wrap up, and we'll go to public comment then. Questions for Tyler, Council Member Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Tyler, thank you for that presentation. I think it was done well, as in a nice, more business type sense to kind of understand some things. I just want to clarify a couple of things that you said. And Andy, you can jump in here too if you think you should answer these questions. But when you mentioned about the things like the net income, the profit, you mentioned, I think there was 91 million in unrestricted cash, I believe it was. I'm not sure exactly the word you used for that. It was 91 million unrestricted. And I think it went down from one year to the next. And so what I was looking for is, okay, what's the net cash position? You mentioned the net income was, I think, about 38. Well, you said like a net income. I want to say it's net income was like the 38 million, I believe it was. But that doesn't always tell the whole story, because like you said, a lot was spent on capital. So the net cash position, I was thinking, was what you were mentioning when it went from like 91 million, it dropped 2 million over year. Do I understand that correctly, as being the net cash position is where we lost 2 million in overall?
Yeah, let me show you another picture here. I'll do another screen share. So it's not specific to just cash. Let me grab this. So this is the much more detailed statement of net position here. So if we're looking at items such as cash, so we are sitting with $97 million in just cash and cash equivalents. There's also restricted cash here of another $11 million. There's investments of $137 million. So basically how we get to net position is all of these kind of current assets, from cash to investments to receivables, prepaids, things like that, less all of our capital assets, which that would be kind of these numbers here, the 122 million and the 700 million to get to the 822 million of total capital assets, and minus some of these liabilities. So these are the debts, accounts payable, accrued wages, and IBNR, all the way down to these debts. So these are the long-term debts due within 1 year is 20 million, more than 1 year, 178 million. Net pension liability is a big number of 65 million. So it's basically an equation where you take all of these kind of the upper current assets minus the corresponding liabilities.
So just to quick answer the question, that do you know what the city's net cash position did year over year?
I don't have it on the presentation. I can see Andy's mind working there, so he's about to answer that question though.
Yeah, I actually had that one pulled up here for later if necessary, but we did have a decline. If you add cash and investments together, the two that he showed there was 235,000 at the end of 2020. At the end of 2019, it was 256. I'm sorry, that's million, 235 million. It was 256 million. A lot of that though could be use of debt proceeds for construction. Some of it could be operating, although I don't think it's operating because we didn't have many net operating losses over the year. My suspicion is it's largely conversion into assets.
Okay, and Mayor, just another quick follow-up question on that 91 million.
Sure.
Andy, this is probably more to you. A lot of people look at that and say, well, the city has $91 million and I think it was unrestricted cash, but I'm sure it's not. It may be unrestricted, but I'm sure we have a lot of that allocated. Can you clarify the 91 million that is unrestricted?
Certainly. So it is, I think the best way I could describe it is it's unrestricted maybe with respect to the financial statements. It's not restricted for a specific liability or something there on the financial statements, but it's certainly restricted within the confines of the fund where that fund balance exists. So the portion of that 91 million that exists for our airport is restricted for our airport and so forth. If you think about taking all of our funds together and starting with your fund balance, and then you start pulling off certain portions that are restricted, maybe restricted for debt or restricted for compensated absences, things like that, whatever's remaining in that fund is the unrestricted portion. If you add all those together, that's where we end up with the 91 million in unrestricted. It's still restricted within the confines of that fund though.
Right. Okay. I just want to clarify to make sure that people don't think we have $91 million out there to spend. So, okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Other questions for Tyler before we turn it back to Andy? Council member Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a question for Mr. Zeller or Mr. Bryant. Last year, there was, I don't want to say a problem, but there was a small thing that had to do with income that was reported, and the recommendation was to have some better training or some specific training. So did that issue get corrected for this year? Thank you.
Yes, it did. So that issue was specific to, we're talking about the single audit. It was the presentation of that particular report and inclusion of some income to make sure that that report was accurate on the preliminary go through, if you will, the initial draft. So there were some problems with that last year. It was fixed, of course, by the time we got to the CAFR presentation, and we followed up with that. And I know Andy and his staff all had specific training that they undertook, and we did not have that same issue this year.
Great. Thank you very much. Councilor Rewalt.
Thank you, Mayor. Tyler, what is the relationship between the 91 million unrestricted and the change in net position of 38.8 million? How do those two relate? Or do they?
I would say there's probably a casual relationship that you can try and discern between the two. They don't necessarily play directly into each other, though. When we're talking about where these assets are sitting, and we're talking about things like capital assets and debt, really to get to net position, it's almost just a simple subtraction. So assets minus liabilities ends in this net position. But the change in net position is a culmination of revenues minus expenses to get to that net position figure. It's not the same as the balance sheet, which is your cash and liabilities. So it's kind of hard to answer that in a super straightforward fashion. But if you think about it from this perspective, if you have a positive change in net position on an ongoing basis, it's going to be adding to your total net position every year, right? Because you have a positive income, which means you're either increasing your assets or decreasing your liabilities. But that doesn't necessarily all flow to the unrestricted portion. So a lot of that in this particular year was flowing into the capital assets. So that's why the unrestricted it actually decreased from last year by about $2 million, but capital assets in comparison increased substantially as about 48 million.
So follow up, please, Mayor.
Go ahead.
So do you have a comparison to 2019 in the change in the net position to comparing it to 2020?
So I didn't have it on the presentation, but specifically within the CAFR, there are a couple places where you can see that change. So like the MD&A, management discussion and analysis, there's several tables within there where you can see 2019 to 2020, and they're compared in a table format, and you can see the change between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Andy, you said that you had some observations. Why don't we turn it over to you? Maybe it'll answer any further questions, and we'll try to also get to public comment. So, Andy.
Sure, you bet, Mayor. Let's see here. So I just kind of put together some slides based upon the email this morning. Kind of wanted to give Tyler the opportunity to talk about the audit and their opinion, and give him the opportunity to talk to you guys, because that's really necessary that he discuss with the governing body. But I wanted to go over high level what a CAFR is, and point out a couple things. And I answered a couple of the questions that you've asked, Mayor, but it's really going to be necessary to go into more detail if we want to talk about it in, I think, in a real informed manner. So the FY20 CAFR, any CAFR, but the FY20 in this case is broken up into 3 sections: introductory, financial, and statistical. And Tyler just went over all those. Again, I'm not going to read this to you, but those are the 3 broad categories. In the staff memo, I tried to break it down for you guys with page numbers and a small description about what's contained in that area. There was some discussion about a big picture, high level overview. And here I recommend, just like Tyler did, start with the MD&A. It's 9-10 pages long. It has a lot of the 2-year comparison stuff that you're looking for, but very high level. You're not going to find the details there. If you want great detail on information, anything in the CAFR, it's a much larger section, the notes page. And then again, historical information can be found in the statistical section. This is all within your staff memo, though, if you want to go back and look at it. I think it's a little more concise than the table of contents. So why is there so much information in the CAFR? Well, I think it kind of boils down to 3 reasons. First, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB, they set standards on what needs to be included in a CAFR. We don't have a lot of ability to present things in the way we want or in a certain specific format. They really set the tone on how it needs to be presented, what needs to be presented. And this is so you can grab a CAFR from Billings and a CAFR from Bozeman and a CAFR from New York City, and they should be comparable to some extent. You should be able to follow the process through and find similar information. There's 4 main purposes for a CAFR: comparing budget to actual financial results being primary, I think. Assessing the financial condition of the government. They assist in determining compliance with finance-related laws and assist with evaluating efficiency and effectiveness of government and government programs. And then finally, there's 3 really big user groups out there. And so we're trying to provide information that's useful to all of them. But as a result, there's going to be portions of it that are not useful to elements of them. And those groups are the citizens, not just of Billings, but the citizens of Montana, the United States, whomever's interested. Legislative and oversight bodies. This is you guys, the state and the federal government. And then investors and creditors. When we go out to borrow money, it's a huge tool for proving creditworthiness. So this is a sample of one of the budget to actuals in the CAFR. There is one of these for every fund or every governmental fund in our CAFR. Starts with the original adopted budget, the final adopted budget. So any changes are a result of budget amendments that we do throughout the year, our actual expenses, and then any variances. In this case, this is the general fund. You see, we had a net change in fund balance. It decreased $3,000, almost, remained flat. So maybe you're curious why. You might look through here for big variances, and you notice the transfer of $4 million was less $4 million. Well, that's because we didn't have to transfer as much to the Public Safety Fund because of the CARES Act. But if you had interest in any specific funds, you could go to the budget to actual and start there as well. Again, they're throughout the funds or throughout the CAFR. Another reason is assessing financial condition. We talked about the MD&A, provides a 2-year comparison. The statistical section, a little bigger and broader, provides 10-year financial trends on revenue and debt capacity, demographic information, and operating information. Just a sample here. This is one of the pages. Page 197 shows the changes in taxable value for the city of Billings. So someone who is perhaps going to loan us money, maybe would find this interesting to see, geez, what happened in 15 to 16 that their taxable value nearly doubled, or see that we have positive growth here in Billings is a good sign for creditworthiness. Additionally, the total number of mills levied has been going down slowly. So that's the type of information you'll find there. The CAFR assists in compliance. Well, this is what Tyler's doing here today, ensuring we're compliant with required federal guidelines with our grants and governmental accounting standards. It also demonstrates our compliance with debt requirements. In the case where we may have borrowed money, they want to see that we have, a certain ratio of cash on hand to operating expenses, things like that. And then finally, it can assist in evaluating efficiency and effectiveness, which really is, are we performing the tasks in a timely and cost-effective manner? And are we doing the right task and completing and achieving goals? This isn't going to be the only thing you use in determining that, but I think it'll provide some basis for making those decisions and really kind of proof that I think we are, in most cases, doing efficient and effective governing. So that kind of just a recap there. And then Mayor, specific to, I think, 3 of the items that you had brought up, cash and investments, generally, why aren't we buying Bitcoin and GameStop? Well, there's 2 governing policies that we abide by. First, Montana Code annotated Title 17, Chapter 16, Part 2, investments really sets the term on what we can invest in. And then our own investment policy adopted by City Council in 2004. Our investment policy is, I would say, slightly more restrictive than the state, but not by much. Our investment policy is number 1 priority, and I've quoted it here for you. The first and foremost objective is to maintain the principle of our investments. We are not taking risks with city funds. The intent there is to use those for what they were collected for. Now, we still do invest them, and we obtain interest on them, and we invest them in U.S. Treasury obligations largely and certificate deposits, things that are low risk, but subsequently low reward as well. This is just a 6-year recap of investment income. It's pretty impressive. I had to debate if I was going to show it because I assumed it must be wrong, but I went back and checked it multiple times. But in 15, interest rates were just so low. We weren't even getting $1 million citywide. And then this most recent year, right around $4 million in interest income. But our interest rates are, our return on investments like 1.5% to 2%. in these 19, 20 years, and well below 1% in this time. And I think we're headed back towards this 17, 18 timeframe here going forward. There was a question about reserve policy. I think we go through this with the general fund each year during budgeting, but the intent here is to provide sufficient cash flow, maintain and secure investment grade bond ratings, offset revenue shortfalls, and provide funds for unforeseen expenditures. Just the general fund reserve here. Of course, we have fund balance in all funds. You've seen this graph before. The orange line are representing our minimum fund balance, and the blue line our total fund balance. As I pointed out earlier, 2019 to 2020, almost no change, and that is 100% due to the CARES Act funds that were accrued at the year end. That's about $6 million that we received in fiscal year 20, and much more coming in 21. Then finally, pension liability and GASB 68. I know probably just enough on this to get me in trouble, but I'm going to take a crack at it anyway. The city participates in 3 pension pools, one for police, one for fire, and one for everybody else. Generally, we have to recognize, I'll back up. There's analysis done each year on those pension funds where multiple assumptions are made. There's actuaries who do lots of analysis and math to say, can assets cover future expenses to these pension funds? And if not, who's going to pay for that in the future? And as a result, it's likely the participants, the members, which are the individual employees, and then the employer, which is us. So we recognize a portion of that on our financial statements. However, the contribution amounts to those retirement funds are set by state statute. The city of Billings pays the amount due on time each year. So we have no liability from a payment perspective, but we do have a liability from this this actuarial assumption. And that number changes each year. There's based upon, I've kind of highlighted a few of the things here, but future compensation changes. They're making assumptions about how long people are going to live, what the future contributions will be from the state. A lot of guesswork. And then each year they kind of shore it up a little bit, but it's always a moving target, I'd say. I think short summary is our police and fire pensions appear to be very well funded, and there is a net liability there, but it likely will be amortized over less than probably about 15 years, which is considered healthy. The PERS, which is the larger one, or the larger employees wise, has about a 35 or 38 year amortization period. And I suspect that the state may make changes in how they're going to handle that. But we don't know exactly what they'll do. This is just, again, 6-year look at our net pension liability, the portion that belongs to the city of Billings. And, we just keep paying the amount required by statute. This net pension liability changes based upon all those assumptions that actuaries put into place. Again, I think that's all I've got for this. Yep. And I probably will ask you not to ask me too many details on the pension liability. I can certainly research it for you, but I'm not going to know enough to give you good answers today.
Thank you, Andy. You really had to hustle to throw those things together today and this afternoon. So it's appreciated, and we recognize you did that. So thanks. Councilor Trickey, you had your hand up.
So thank you, Andy. That was very helpful. Let me see if I understand what you're saying about the pension things correctly. Whether it's in good shape or bad shape, it really is up to the state to manage that, and and there's very little we can do at the city level. Is that a correct assumption?
Mayor, Councilmember Trickey, I'm going to say yes, that's a correct assumption. We have no management of those funds at all, other than withholding the proper amounts and writing the check. The state makes all investment decisions, sets statutory contribution amounts, and makes retirement eligibility decisions as well.
Okay, thank you.
And Councilor Trickey, the only thing I guess I would add to that is we do have a role in what we want the state to do, or what we don't want the state to do. So there's a move at the state level to require a higher percentage contribution by cities and potentially employees, I suppose. So how we respond to those legislative moves could have a big impact one way or another. Other questions for Andy? Chris Kukulski.
And I'm going to preface my comment with the same statement that Andy had. I probably only know enough to get myself in trouble here, but I wanted to just kind of add to the answer. There really are three, as I understand it, three primary revenues that go into the system. One is what they earn on their investments, but they are probably quite restricted too, but that's a bucket. Our employees make a contribution that's set by the state. The state tells us what employees need to contribute, and we as the employer contribute. So those two numbers have changed over the past 20 some years that I've been in Montana. Not a lot, but occasionally they have both the employee contribution and the employer contribution. And maybe lastly, one of the things you'll see in the police and fire, those are funded at a much considerably higher rate by both the state of Montana and the cities. So it's never been a surprise to me that those two funds are quite a bit healthier, as there's a significant, I want to say the contribution somewhere in the 14-15% range for police and firefighters by the city, whereas for the rest of the employees, that number I think covers closer to 8%, maybe 7%, somewhere in that neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilor Rewald.
Chris, I got a question on that. You said like 14% for police and fire by the city. Does that include the employees portion of it also, or is that just the city?
That is just the city. So both, yeah. There's a substantial difference in the numbers of contribution. Just city, when I say roughly 14%.
All right, and then Mayor, if I got another question for Andy, probably. So, Andy, did I hear you right that you're saying that our investments were getting between 1.5% and 2% gain in interest over the year?
Yes, you did. The major thing we invest in it's called STIP. I don't know what it's, short-term investment pool, state investment pool. It's managed by the state, and it's within all the under the purview of all the state investment rules. And so we can just give them the money and know that it meets our compliance. And that's lately been the best rate. And I think right now it's at 1.5%.
So does that keep us ahead of inflation?
It depends on the year, but probably not by much if it does at all. But
depends on whose cost of living we go by, right? If it's Social Security's, we're ahead, but if it's everybody else's, we're behind.
That sounds like a fair statement.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for Andy? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. And Andy, I'm not going to ask you a retirement question, but it is go along the lines of Frank and his investments. The investment policy, I think you said, was 2004, the last time it was approved by the council. You do plan to bring that to us to do a review and maybe a stamp of reapproval so that we don't have a policy that is almost 20 years old that we're referring to?
Mayor, City Council, Councilmember Neese, I honestly hadn't intended to. I figured that question would come up. And after reading through it today, I mean, I'll send it out to you guys for review. And certainly if you guys feel the need to bring it back, by all means, I'm happy to. But I think when you read it, you'll see it's not very, very prescriptive in this is what you will do. I mean, it's policy that's kind of high level and guiding document, but not a recipe for how to invest necessarily. Right. But I'll send that out and you guys can certainly make that decision.
Okay, thank you. I just am worried when we get policies that we're referring that are almost 20 years old that we haven't done something to reapprove it or something. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Councilor Bernice, you were referring to the policy on cash investment there, right? Correct. On the reserves, Andy, and I apologize if you said this in your presentation, but I think that policy requires a 5-year review. And where are we at on that schedule? So,
Mayor, Council, you are correct. That policy does require a 5-year review. I think we're on probably year 10 of it being reviewed is my guess. It hasn't been done since I've been here, and I'm not aware that it was done prior to my arrival here. So I think it's certainly something we need to bring to you guys, well, to Chris and then to you guys for review. I talked with him today about that, and I think there's some state statute on reserve policies that may be helpful in, I think, in modifying ours and crafting it going forward that we'll want to look at.
Okay, good to know that's in the works or will be in the works, I think. Councilor Bernice.
Just a quick question, Andy, on these policies that we've come across from time to time. They haven't been reviewed in a long time. Does that have any impact on our overall financial consideration or in the JCHCS reports, things like that? Could that hurt us negatively if we're not updating our policies from time to time?
Tyler, would you put your earplugs in while we have this discussion, please?
I can certainly envision a world where it would hurt us if we weren't reviewing policies that were bad. In the case of fund balance, we could find ourselves in a situation where we have too much reserved, and so we're not making good decisions, or we don't have enough reserved and we're making bad decisions because we think it's a good number. So certainly some review of that is warranted and benefit, but I don't know that it's necessary to do a deep dive into every single one. But certainly a read through and looking for obvious errors and updating for things that are known now that weren't 20 years ago. That's my political answer. I'll give you a non-answer there. How's that?
Thank you, Andy.
Okay, thank you very much. Council, I think we should move to public comment on this item. And if we need to, we can come back. But let's at least give the public an opportunity to weigh in case people have been watching and chomping at the bit. So if anybody is out there watching, please call that number immediately. The number for public comment on item number 3 is 237-6196. That number again, 237-6196. We'll ask that you keep your comments to less than 3 minutes. Tell us what your name and address is up front. And please be sure to turn off or mute your television or your computer because our meeting is ahead of what you're hearing. And it's very confusing if there's that delay. So that number again, 237-6196. That's the same number for all of our public comment items tonight. Denise, do we have anybody who has called 237-6196?
No, Mayor, I've received no calls.
Okay, thank you very much. Please let us know, Denise, if you hear somebody in the next few seconds while I go back to council and just ask. Council, is there anything else on this item that you'd like to address before we thank our presenters and move on to item number 4? Not seeing anything, so we'll close the public comment period on item number 3. Tyler, thank you very much. See you next year, and I hope we get the same clean report.
Thank you. Appreciate Appreciate being here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll then move on to item number 4. Council, I'll just point out here, we're at about 7 o'clock. We just tried to take a break around 7:30. We'll see how we go. If we can finish this, great. If not, we may have to take a mid discussion break. So, Elise, Mana, you're our presenter, I think, tonight. At least you've got the introduction. So, before I turn it over to Elise, is there anything from Chris? Nope, we're good. You got the thumbs up. So, Elise, take it away.
Yeah. Hi, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having us tonight. Just as a reminder, my name is Elise Monat. I'm the Active Transportation Planner here. And today we have Mac Drzajic and Mike Sellinger from Alta Planning and Design. They were our consultants that were chosen for this bike and scooter share project. And so the bike and scooter share feasibility study was basically to figure out, is bike and or scooter share possible in Billings? And if so, what form would it take? This is part of our Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, review process. So it has already gone to the Technical Advisory Committee as well as our Planning Board, and they both forwarded recommendations of approval to the Policy Coordinating Committee, which is the final body that acts on our documents. It will be going to the Policy Coordinating Committee, or PCC, on March 18th. And so tonight it's just a presentation from our consultants, and we'll be coming back next week on your consent agenda, hopefully for a recommendation of approval to the PCC. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mac and Mike and let them share their findings with you.
Hi, thanks, Elise, and thanks, Mayor Cole and City Council. We're grateful to be here, and I'll just get right into it by sharing my screen, if that's okay.
Please do.
Can you all see a screen that says Bike and Scooter Share Feasibility Study?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just to get right into it and to get everyone on the same page as to what bike and scooter share is, also known as shared micromobility, as sometimes you hear it referenced. It's at its simplest form, a network of shared bicycles and scooters that are available for individuals to rent for short-term use. And it's pretty simple how it works. You check it out at a designated location, you ride it to your destination, and you return it to a designated location where it's there available for the next person to use. And, shared micromobility can really help cities achieve some of their transportation goals. Some of the benefits include reduced emissions, the enhancement of transit by making those critical kind of first last mile connections and expanding the access of transit. It can help provide more options for residents by giving them just various transportation options and kind of increasing an equitable transportation system. It can improve individual and community health through through active transportation. And lastly, it can kind of contribute to that safety and numbers effect for all vulnerable road users. As you see more scooters and bikes in the urban landscape, it contributes to the idea that it's a legitimate mode of transportation. It kind of normalizes it. So why this study now? Well, City of Billings is, with this study, can now be prepared to launch a successful program should funding or partnership opportunities arise. And so we'll go over some of the recommendations and get into those details in further slides. And Mike, who is with me from our Portland office, will be contributing to some of those discussions as well and answering questions. So just real quickly, an overview of what we did. We looked at Billings and through the lens of bike and scooter share and looked at opportunities and constraints. We listened to the public, we listened to stakeholders in the steering committee, and we looked at what's being done around the country and other cities similar to Billings to land on some recommendations for 1, a service type, 2, a system governance, which is basically speaking to ownership and operation, and then 3, a system launch in terms of costs and revenues. And the goals of this plan really are aligned with some of the benefits I just mentioned a couple slides ago. the steering committee identified as something that they'd like to see a bike and scooter share system, if implemented, achieve in the Billings area. I'm progressing quickly through these slides just so we can get to the bulk of the recommendations, and I know we're limited on time, so I want to hear your questions. But to give you a quick view into the public engagement, Alta created, in lieu of any kind of in-person outreach because of COVID, an online platform that allowed participants to educate themselves on the basics of bike and scooter share, and also take a survey to answer some questions and express preferences and opinions about bike and scooter share in Billings. Participants were also prompted to drop pins on an interactive map where they could indicate locations where they personally would like to maybe access bike and scooter share in Billings. And you can reference the full report to get more into detail on what we heard from the public. But a couple takeaways I wanted to highlight here was that there was mixed support. 53% said they would be interested in seeing bike and scooter share in Billings. I believe it was about 23 or 24% said they would not be interested, and the rest said they'd like some more information before forming an opinion. Another interesting takeaway was that 43% said bike and scooter share trips would replace car trips, which is consistent with trends we've been seeing across the country, and just the propensity that shared micromobility has to actually serve utility for transportation and not just recreation. And to give you a little flavor of the analysis we did before I turn the time over to Mike for the recommendations, we ran a couple analyses that you see here on the screen that try to give us kind of a guide, a sense of locations across the city that might benefit most from a bike and scooter share system. So we looked at demand that overlays variables such as residential density, transit use, land use, population density. And the areas you see in red are those areas that are of higher demand according to our analysis. And then similarly with the equity analysis, we looked at some equity indicators such as race, income, access to a vehicle. And we're also able to kind of identify these hotspots that serve as a guide, not a hard rule as to where bike and scooter share might most benefit residents of Billings. So I'll turn the time over to Mike to get into detail on some of our recommendations because, as Elise mentioned, bike and scooter share can take many forms, and that was kind of the goal of this project, to see what form it should take in Billings.
Thanks, Mac. So we organized our recommendations around these three categories of what the system type should look like, what the governance structure should look like, and then some strategies around launch. There's a lot more than these top level ones I'm going to go over today in the report, with a lot more detail covering just about every single aspect of bike share, from things like winter maintenance to helping select a vendor and things like that. But for today, I'm just going to focus on really some of these key top line recommendations, and happy to answer any questions about them with more detail. The first recommendation is the system type, and that is we landed on something called a hybrid system. And this is a bike share system type that is between what is called a docked system, where the bikes always have to be docked to a station, and a dockless station where there are no docks and the bikes can be left anywhere. So this type of system is intended for people to dock at the stations, but the technology exists on the bike, so it can actually be left for typically a small fee in other legal parking spots. Another recommendation on the type of bike is for an electric assist bike. This is really just where the industry has headed, and we'll find they get much more use. They reach a broader audience, especially in hotter conditions. People are much more likely to use them. And the cost of having that electric assist motor is not very much more than a standard bike share bike. Next slide, please. Thanks. There's a lot of different ways these are set up. Bike share systems exist in well over 100 cities across North America and in all cities of all sizes and types. So we wanted to focus in on what the governance model that would work best in Billings would be. And there are two options that really fit well in this context. The first would be a turnkey system. And this is kind of more akin to renting a bike share system. There's very, very little effort or staff capacity, and it can be implemented very fast, but there's less control from the public. So the other option, if for having more control, would be a publicly owned and privately operated system. In that case, the city or another public agency would take on ownership of the equipment, and contract out with a vendor to provide operations. Next slide, please. This here shows the map on where we landed for the initial ideal service area for a bike share system focused around downtown Billings and the MSU Billings campus. We recommend 140 to 200 bikes in this system with about 17 stations. Some of the locations that were chosen based on public input and the demand and equity analyses were at MS2 Billings, the Billings Community Center, Yellowstone Art Museum, Billings Public Library, and the YMCA, just to name a few. Next slide, please. Another part of the recommendations is focused around making this an equitable transportation system. We heard that time and again from our stakeholder community and from the public that they wanted this as an option that would be available to as many people as possible. And we've seen bike share work to really be an equitable transportation option in many cities, but it has to come with some certain strategies to make that available. So those are things like income-based discounts and targeted marketing to certain groups. Next slide. Finally, looking at the costs and revenues associated with this system that we have proposed, I want you to keep in mind these are very high-level numbers, and there's many variables as you move to implementation of the exact cost. But to get an understanding of where things, of the ballpark of that is, the launch costs to set up a bike share system would be around a one-time cost of $300,000. Capital, that's buying all of the bike and station equipment, would be around $450,000. And then we expect the operations, which is maintaining the fleet, moving them around, rebalancing, to cost about $300,000 a year. On the revenue side, there are three primary sources of revenue for bike share systems. The first are user fees. So that's the direct fees people pay to use the bikes. And like most public transportation systems in the United States, we see that those user fees do not capture the full cost of operation. So in systems similar to the one we're recommending in Billings, we see that fare box recovery rate, or how much you're going to capture through direct user fees, to be about 30 to 35%. The other two funding sources for bike share systems are advertising and sponsorship. Often we see medical institutions or other large companies step in and use bike share as an effective advertising method. And then finally, whatever is not captured between user fees and that sponsorship source would typically come from public funding sources. There's a wide range of different sources that are used that can be direct funding. We often see grant programs at the state level, and also there are a number of federal funding sources available. Next slide, please. Finally, the next steps of this study, this was just looking at the feasibility, so it doesn't come with funding for bike share. So that next step would be start to explore some of those funding opportunities. Are there partners in the community who would be interested in sponsoring or being a partner on this, helping to take on some of the costs? And also just to work to build those partnerships. The most effective bike share systems are always deeply embedded within the community and have lots of people working to support that. So that's the quick high-level overview of the recommendations, and I'd like to reserve the rest of the time for any questions.
Thank you very much. Lise, anything to add before we open it up for questions?
I don't think so. That was a pretty good overview.
I thought it was an excellent overview. I really enjoyed reading the very detailed study. Thank you, all of our consultants. I got the impression you've done this before.
A few other places, yeah.
Yeah, which was just great. And all the questions were popping in my mind. If I just read for a few more pages, they tended to get answered. So having just received a e-bike for Christmas, I was fascinated by your statistics that the cities that have converted to e-bike saw a double or triple rate of usage increase because other people are just as lazy as I am. So that was a great takeaway. On funding, I'll just mention to the council here, I did by coincidence have a conversation with Senator Tester's office today, who pledged help to try to look for possible funding sources. I'm sure Senator Daines' office and Representative Rosendale would say the same thing. Quick question or two. One, it does come down to money. What are the options for federal dollars? I know the report identified some different federal programs, but as a practical matter, what are the odds of finding at least one-time capital investment dollars? And then the other big hurdle is finding that private operator. None of your recommendations call for us to maintain this and operate it, which is good because we wouldn't do no offense, Chris and your staff or Elise, but we don't have any experience doing this. So what are the odds of finding a company with a good experience that would take on the operation? So federal money and finding an operator. Can you either Mac or Mike or Elise address that?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'll let Mike tackle that.
Thanks, Mac. I don't want to give you the odds of finding that federal source, but there are a number of options. One being CMAQ funding related to air quality. Another big one, and that's not as certain at the moment, but there is, and especially when you're talking to your representatives at the federal level, there is currently an act that has been sponsored by a number of representatives called the Bike Share Transit Act that would really open up all of the FTA funds, which are the Federal Transit Authority funds, to be allowed for any bike share expenses. They can currently be used for some expenses, but not for that ongoing operations, which is often the crux to getting the system going. So something to keep an eye on is that Bike Share Transit Act. I think there's some definitely seeing some support gathering, and I think that would be a game changer at the federal level. For your other question about finding an operator, that I have a lot of confidence in. This is a fast-growing market. There's a number of different companies out there. I've recently worked with a couple different cities on securing an operator, and for all of the requests for proposals we put out, we had very enthusiastic responses of all different types of operators. So I think very confident if you can find that funding piece that you'd be able to find the right operator for Billings.
Thank you very much. Questions for other council members? Councilmember Trickey?
From your experience of having seen Billings, and the, network that we have in place for biking and trails and stuff like that, I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts about whether we should be thinking initially about more of a commuter type of service or more of a recreation type of service. Or do you think we can dive in and do both?
That's a good question, Councilmember Trickey. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think one interesting thing we heard from the survey responses, one of the top two concerns that people expressed with bike share showing up in Billings was the lack of safe infrastructure, which I thought was interesting. But I know, having worked with Billings on previous plans, I know that a lot is being done to implement facilities from the Trails and Bikeways Master Plan, and that's constantly improving. You have an awesome trail system, and I know the Downtown Billings Alliance and the Chamber of Commerce will often send visitors on their kind of random assortment of bikes to explore the trails along the river and the rims. And so I think there's an opportunity for both. We kind of outlined that initial service area that primarily focuses on the downtown and MSU Billings area, which would kind of limits at least the locations that folks can redock or repark the bikes outside of that service area. But that's not to say they can't take it for a ride on the trails and come back into town and repark it. But I would say these short trips are often what are utilized for bike share, these 15 to 20 minute trips. And so it could be both, but I don't know if Mike, you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer, Mac. But yeah, I agree that it's really targeting both. Every city varies a little bit in where we see those numbers land on if it's more utilitarian trips, people going about their daily business versus more fun. But we saw from the survey there was enthusiasm in the community for both types of trips. So I think I think you definitely have both. And one thing I just will point out, since Mac brought up the concern of lack of infrastructure, two things on that. One, we've often seen bike share come into communities and really broaden the appeal and support for biking, which has helped find more money for the infrastructure. And then the other thing, which is kind of has always been remarkable to me, is just the safety record of bike share. I like to tell people that taking a bike share trip is much safer than riding a bike. I don't know exactly, we don't have proof of exactly why that is. There's a number of reasons. People, there tend to be heavier bikes, you're not going quite as fast. They're more visible, people tend to give them more space. But we have had millions and millions of bike share trips in the US and only a few fatalities, which when you compare that to the track record of biking in general, it is a much safer mode of transportation.
Thank you very much. Elise, you wanted to follow up on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, which is that Rusty Logan is on here as well today, and Matt has expressed interest in possibly helping out with some sort of bike share if it would supplement the transit system, and with the assumption that they could find funding for it. So that kind of also answers the question of, is it utilitarian or, recreational? Although I think it would be great also for tourists to come to Billings. So just kind of an added layer with that.
Thank you. Yeah, Rusty, your name is featured prominently on the plan, and you're part of that committee. So you want to take this opportunity to just comment on what your role is and what you see a program like this, what it might mean?
Well, thank you, Mayor, Council. Thank you for indulging some of our musings this evening about how this could integrate with the transit system. Throughout the study, I was on part of the just the overall steering committee and the selection committee for the project to begin with. And throughout the course of the study, there was quite a number of benefits that were brought up as far as integration with the transit system goes. It really helps to solve one of the main conundrums of a transit system, is that first mile, last mile for somebody that travels on the bus system. It can really help to significantly supplement the transit system, because when somebody arrives at an area on the route that's close to their final destination, they could then use the bicycle then to complete their travel in a more expedient manner, and help them just get to the destination more quickly. As far as some of the stuff that's moving through Congress, there are opportunities already available in the Federal Transit Administration funding programs to potentially support bike share systems. There's caveats where you cannot actually use funding to purchase the vehicles themselves, but you can provide infrastructure, say a bus stop. You could have a bike share station that's included with the initial construction project of that, or additional amenities that are added to that, or say for the downtown transfer center, using that as a primary hub for the bike share system. So it is something that we've considered here. I do view the potential for it to significantly improve the overall transit experience within the city of Billings. We're at an opportunity that we opted to pursue. But of course, once again, it does come back to that funding piece. There are ways, as they had mentioned, for us to procure some of that funding. And there are also ways that we could potentially utilize existing funding within the transit system and infrastructure. We already maintain a fleet of buses, so a fleet of bicycles isn't that much of an additional ask as far as that goes. But it really comes down to what the discussion would revolve around and how we could best structure that in order to support it, and whether or not it would be a feasible and a project that that we can fully execute to the expectations of the public as well. But overall, it is something that we would be more than interested in continuing the discussion on. And I'm happy to answer any additional questions if anybody has those.
Okay, thank you very much, Rusty, for your efforts here. Other questions for our consultants or Rusty? Councilmember Ewald?
Thank you, Mayor. So, is it safe to assume that it was 300,000 for the stations and 450,000 for the bikes? So that's your capital outlay, and then you have a 300,000 maintenance per year with a 30 to 35% return. So you're going to be investing $750,000, and you're going to get the 100,000 back, is that a very profitable position, or to me, it doesn't sound like it is.
Who'd like to comment? Those financial breakdowns are in the report, a little more specific than that. So, Mike, your mic is on, or your.
Yeah, I would just say, Councilmember, I think we do have the detail in the report, but what you bring up is close to accurate, and just I think reiterates that the goal really of any bike share system is not typically to be profitable, is to provide those mobility benefits and the other benefits that Mac talked about to the community.
Okay, and then just on, if I can have a follow-up, Mayor, it's a dig on you. The heart healthy deal, if you're putting all e-bikes out there, you could take the heart healthy off, because all you're doing is sitting and riding the bike. So that's all I got to say.
Does anybody have any word in support of us couch potatoes? Some people think e-bikes are like motorcycles. They're clearly not. They're pedal assist. Maybe that's an important point to get across. But for you experts, is there any actual value there? Councilmember Boyette wants to weigh in on this one.
Now, from one who's had all the knees done and ankles, the doctor says to go for a walk. He said that's by far the best thing, and that's what I recommend for you, Mayor, is to walk, not to ride on a bike. The other thing is, and I don't want to put a downer to it, but I'd rather spend $1 million and buy a fire station in the Heights is what I'd rather do. And I've spent some time down in Arizona. I was at the Arizona State University and down in Scottsdale, and they both had the bikes and the scooters. They banned the scooters because people were riding them on the sidewalks and running over people. The bicycles seem to be the best of the two. I just don't know that we, the city, should be paying the operating cost. I mean, why not have a private industry come in and just do it themselves? Let them collect their own revenue. Again, I'd rather spend my money on a fire department for the Heights.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Neese.
Thank you. So what I was going to ask goes along pretty much with what Mike was saying and kind of what Frank is saying too, because you made a comment about there's vendors out there that are happy to set these up. Well, with a lot of things in Billings, because of the size of our community, we're just on that edge whether or not vendors will come here. So some of the pictures that you showed, those look like in major metropolitan areas. So I guess one of my questions is, what would be some comparable sized cities, not only in population, but also in square mileage, who uses these things, and they also are making a profit? And is there a cutoff with vendors as to what size of a community that they will actually come into? Because if it's not going to be profitable for a private vendor, then I don't know why the city would do it.
Mac, Mark, whoever. Please.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. To answer some of the couple of those questions, we do have a number of case studies within the report. I don't have them up in front of me, documenting some very similar size cities in terms of square mileage and topography, things like that. In terms of the vendors coming in, there is a certain size market where the vendors will come in and operate at their own expense, and with the idea they make a profit. But what we have not seen recently, and the market does change, especially in a new industry like this. A few years ago, there was a new model coming into cities of all sizes that proved very not profitable. That's gone away. And now we see them only operating at their own expense in very large metro areas. So we do not expect to see that in Billings. So I think that is a key finding of this study, is that in order for a vendor to come in, they would need to have a contract with the city or another public agency, so that there's not going to be profit made in this, but the city would be providing the operating contract for them to come in. And we do have lots of cities of similar size and much smaller where that is the case, currently operating.
Thank you very much. Councilor Neese, did you have your hand up?
I did. Thank you, Mayor. And I guess I'm kind of like you. I'd like to coast downhill on my bike, but the only problem is I got to pedal it back up. And maybe an e-bike would be nice. But anyway, I also am a little concerned about this. I think we as a city, as a policy, if we're not preventing any company from coming in here and running a profitable service, then make sure our policy is not interfering with this being established here. I'm not looking to add another city government agency or something like this. That's not my thought. But I would like to know: are there any cities in Montana that are doing this now? Is any of the cities doing? I know in my business, I've been contacted by some people wanting to do something like this, but I don't know if they ever got it set up. So is anyone actually doing it here in Montana?
Councilmember Neese, I think I can hopefully help jump in and answer that. There was a program that was started in Bozeman, primarily with dockless scooters. So those are the scooters that can be kind of left wherever on the street. I'm not sure if she's still operating, but we definitely we were approached by a private company, and that's kind of what got this started is, we wanted to be prepared in case that should happen, to have something that really works for Billings and is appropriate for Billings. And, even though we've heard, that the market is turning around, it could come back, but this is also providing a framework for us to put something out there if we do it as a city. And so, we, as well as several other cities, were approached about this. Bozeman is the only one I know of that implemented something.
Okay, and Mayor, another follow-up, maybe a comment, maybe a question, but in the cities that I've been to, I agree with Councilmember Boyette about the scooters. They zip right past you on the sidewalk. They're dangerous. Those need to be banned from any kind of sidewalks and stuff like that. The scooters belong in the street. But the other thing I noticed, there was always these bikes, whether if they weren't up in a tree, they were in the drink of the ditch somewhere. I'm sure they'll be driven up off over the rims. There's all kinds of things that is going to be a problem here. And then of course, when we got our winter time, that they won't even, I can't imagine them being used much. Maybe they will be. We've had a pretty mild winter this winter, and I guess they could have gotten used a lot. But I'm concerned if this cost estimate, does that take into account the fact that these are, is that typically, these costs, do they cover all that vandalism and destruction of the property like that?
Well, to answer your question, yes, the operations cost includes vehicle maintenance and replacement. I'll also just add that I think a lot of what we've been seeing in the media and experiencing ourselves, we've traveled around the country and seen these dockless systems. As Mike mentioned, the industry is very fast changing, and those systems are now those for-profit dockless systems where private companies are kind of just permitted by cities to drop off their vehicles, and in any city that's being largely targeted towards larger metro areas. And so that's where you saw a lot of the bike and scooter litter, was when these private dockless companies were coming in and just kind of dropping off hundreds of vehicles at a time. That's not to say with a hybrid system like we're recommending that there wouldn't be any vandalism, there wouldn't be any misplaced or misparked bikes, but the likelihood of that happening at the scale that maybe you're referring to is not as high at all.
And I'd like to just add on one thought.
Please.
Thank you. And that's one of the things that drove this recommendation to the hybrid system is this is a very different bike than those dockless bikes. It's much higher quality. It does have some higher costs, but it is much harder to vandalize. It's all built. These are built with custom parts that can't be stolen and used on any other bikes. They come with a hefty U-lock that requires them to be locked to another physical object. So as Max said, there can be some improper parking, but these also all have a GPS unit on board. So we find most operators are able to recover most of their bikes but the costs do include those a theft and vandalism budget.
Okay. Mayor, if you don't mind, if there's not another question, I have another question.
Go ahead.
When we have other businesses using city sidewalks and city property, there's encroachment fees that are paid by that. So is this envisioned that the stations then would be paying the city their proper encroachment fee for the amount of space they're taking up on the city sidewalks and things like that? Anyone?
Can you answer that question? I mean, I think if it's privately owned, if it's publicly owned, then it's the city's property, and so those encroachment fees wouldn't necessarily be required as they are from a private entity like a storefront. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, but if they're owned by the transportation department, that's different than the public works department. So those encroachment fees go to different departments. So would these encroachment fees be coming into this encroachment project then when these are placed?
And so that is a detail that would need to be worked out in implementation. I've seen a number of different arrangements in different cities. My hometown in Portland, for example, even though it's a fully publicly owned system originally with all federal grants, there still were fees for any parking spot that was removed. They had to compensate for all of the parking meter revenue, for example. So there are examples like that. And I've also seen other examples where cities waive those fees because they are just trying to encourage those spaces, good public spaces where the stations make sense.
Thank you. Any other questions for our presenters this evening? Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. Great presentation. One of the things that it makes me think of is that we hear over and over and over again by a number of our business community leaders that our city is moving in the direction of having a very serious work shortage. Especially for people. I have no idea how old Mac and Mike that you are, but I'm assuming it's kind of in your general age bracket. And so when I look at something like this in the presentation that you provided, it makes me think that this is the type of lifestyle choice that people in your age bracket and Kendra's age bracket and younger, which is really the future of Billings. That this is where we're seeing communities go in regard to investing in the future lifestyle choices that are very different from the lifestyle choices of those in my age bracket and older. So is that a trend that you're seeing in communities that are working on building workforces, on building economic development? Are these some of the things that you're seeing that some of those cities are going toward, are projects like these and bringing these types of amenities into their cities? Thank you.
Mark?
Mike, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can hop in. I mean, that's a really tough question to, I think, unpack all of it. I would probably say yes. I agree with that. We're seeing a lot of communities really investing in an easier lifestyle to get around, walking and biking, and that has been attracting a lot of talent. That's anecdotal evidence on my end. I don't have the research to back it all up, but I do agree with your sentiment. I have seen many surveys indicating that younger people really are looking for these amenities when they're choosing where to live.
And I just want to rebut that and say that even us old couch potatoes, when I get to New York, I always use Citibank bike. When I'm in Boulder, I use B-bike. And when I'm in San Antonio, whatever they've got, I've used them all. So it won't kill us. It's a great fun. It's a great way to get around a city. Councilmember E. Walton, that we should move to public comment to that phone number 237-6196. Councilmember E. Walton.
Thank you, Mayor. I received an email today, so I don't know if it's true or not, but it said that Missoula City Council just turned this e-bike system down. This sounds like this last week. One of their comments was, we'll let somebody else invent the wheel in Montana, and then if it works, we'll follow suit. Otherwise, we're going to stay out of it. So Somebody asked a question if anybody else has it in Montana. Well, if that's true, Missoula did turn it down. The city council did. So.
Okay, thank you very much for that information.
Mr. Mayor, I have one more question, if you don't mind.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Purington, go ahead.
I put my raise the hand on, but I don't know if you can see it.
I can.
You're ignoring me. Okay,
sorry.
that's okay. That's fine. So, okay, one question. Elise, I think I'm going to address this to you. We have several bike shops in Billings. Well, I say several. We don't have that many, I suppose, but we have a few bike shops that are profitable in Billings. Do you know whether or not they rent? Of course, these would be pedal bikes. Do they rent those?
Thank you, Councilmember Purington, for that question, Mayor and Council. So yes, and actually I have been in this situation a couple of times. I was an AmeriCorps member several years ago, and my AmeriCorps members from across Montana came to Billings, and we were looking to rent bikes. And in order to put together, I think we needed 11 bikes. It was very difficult. I believe some of the bike shops do rent them out for, I want to say $65 a day. So we're looking at nothing. It would not cost nearly that much to rent a bike for an hour or something like that. There are some bikes that are available for rent from both the Chamber and the Downtown Billings Association. But there aren't that many. Like I said, when I was trying to assemble 10 or 11 bikes, it was very difficult. I resorted to borrowing a bike from my neighbor and getting it fixed up at the spoke shop so that we could use it. So I think this would definitely help tourists and just people who don't have bikes in general, especially if they're in a big group. I know earlier the mayor was looking for some bikes for a conference that was held in Billings to go on a bike tour. So this would definitely be a big help there.
So just as a follow-up, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
So Elise, did you make the comment, did you say that the Chamber and the Downtown Association, that they both rent bikes for visitors?
Yes, Councilmember Purington. They have a few bikes to borrow, but you have to go, you have to get them during their business hours. These are bikes that would be available basically 24 hours a day to get them. And they're also very limited. But we have heard that they are very popular. And both of those organizations were on our project oversight committee and were able to give input, and we're interested in this as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I don't think there's any charge for those. There's only 3 or 4 for each, but they're available. 237-6196 is your phone number to call for public comment. Please do so if you'd like to comment on this item. 237-6196. Council, I'll note that we are past our 7:30 hour, but we're getting close here, so I'm going to try to wrap this up before we take a break. I hope that's okay. Denise, do we have anyone who's called 237-6196?
No, Mayor, I've received no calls.
Okay, please let us know while we get a question from Councilmember Tricky or comment by Councilmember Tricky.
Yeah, I did want to make a couple of comments about this. First of all, I do not see this as a hard proposal at this point. I don't see us sitting here and saying, yes, this is something we're going to be doing in the near future. This study to me is much more of like a thought experiment. It's like, what would this look like if we were to try to bring something like this into Billings? When I asked the question at the very beginning about recreational versus commuter, my own personal experience in terms of using bikes and whatnot, and looking at the way things are laid out here in Billings, I think for a private bike rental system to be effective and be able to make money, we would have to have a couple of nexus spots within the city that were part of a good recreational bike trail system. And in my mind, I think that is probably the way that we have to move in order to get something like this up and going. It really boils down to whether or not you think bikes should be a part of the future of Billings. Personally, when I lived in Bozeman and I was going to college, I rode a bike most of the time. And then when I moved to New York City for the first 2 months, I very stubbornly tried to use my bike on a regular basis, commuting back and forth from Brooklyn to Midtown Manhattan, and finally gave up, mainly because it just was so hard to do and there was no place to put my bike. Sadly, I left New York City just when they were starting their bike share thing. I was able to participate in it for like the first couple of months they were doing it. And I see photographs of what's been happening in New York City with that program, right, over the last couple of years. And it just, it makes me, really want to go back and do that, The comparison between an e-bike is not really between walking and riding a bike or riding an e-bike. It is a comparison between driving a car and being on an e-bike. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. You're outside, you're doing something that is not as active as walking, but it is active. And it really is something that I think we need to be thinking about how to incorporate into the future for Billings. Is it going to happen right away? No, but we need to be thinking about the infrastructure and the things we need to put in place today so that 5 years from now, some business will come in and say, hey, this is a great spot. One of our local bike businesses can get in there and say, hey, I can do this now. So that's my 2 cents on this and where I think we need to be thinking and going on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tricky. Denise, looks like maybe we have a caller who's called 237-6196. Is that true?
That is true, Mayor. We have Nancy Bennett on the line from 801 Avenue E. I'll put her on now. Nancy?
Yeah.
Hi. Yes, I've introduced you. You have 3 minutes to give us your comment, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm going to keep it calm and quiet. Before we add more bikes and scooters to the streets, my suggestion for all city council members would be, I can't remember if it was Rehberg East or Rehberg West, but the city did Pauley Avenue very, very nicely. What are they called? CIDs on the homeowners for curbs, gutter, and sidewalks. And then the city said, we don't have enough money to put up street lights. But they did mark the ground with bike paths. I suggest all of you take that drive and wonder, as I'm wondering, I'm waiting for the first lawsuit. You got a bike path, you have no light. Even parking in front of my sister's house, I'm in a bike path, but I can't see it. I mean, this is crazy stuff. If you can't afford lighting, why are we adding more? I don't even know how to explain it. Spend $1 million on adding bikes to streets that aren't lit. I'm sorry. Well, I don't mean to be so rude, but it's insanity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Denise, anybody else who's called 237-6196?
I don't have anyone left in the queue.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and close the public comment period then on this item. Anything else, Council, before we take a break? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I have some anecdotal evidence too. My daughter loved to ride her bike to work from the Heights, but I was in the summertime. You're right. I think there is a different generation of than what we would do, Penny. But one of the questions I had for the members, because I can't see us putting a program together where it's losing $210,000 a year or more. And so my thought on this is a system like this could enhance the value of the property and the businesses in the area that they're probably at, I'm assuming. Am I correct in that assumption that people, because the talk is, well, businesses want to, people want to work downtown or they want to live downtown because they can have their bike and ride it to work and things like that. So that's going to be the benefit to have all of this in kind of one area. So the demand will be higher there to either work down there or live down there. Does that make sense to me? Is that correct? I didn't see anything talk about that in the report. Does that help the value of the properties there?
Mac or Mike, can you comment?
I think that's a fair assumption, just as if, you have a business along a transit line that's more attractive to your employees than if you're not along a transit line, just because it provides more options. And so as far as it adding value to the property, just because of the infrastructure that's there that exists, I don't know about that. But in terms of sense of place and where you're located in the city and convenience, it adds another layer of convenience if you're right by a bike share station.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, follow up then on that.
Sure.
Because I agree with Danny and the callers, we don't have the infrastructure to do this citywide. And if we're going to do something like this, their study says do it in the downtown area, and you do have a lot more lighting down there in that area. If it's going to benefit those people, and we can't, as a city can't fund it, then again, I'm not advocating it this way, but have you guys, as a study, looked at this as putting a district in place to fund that extra $200,000 it's going to cost? Because the assumption would be they're going to benefit the greatest because their businesses are going to do better. The housing market's going to do better. People are going to live there. They don't have to drive as much because they got their bikes, things like that. Has there been any talk about doing a district to pay for that extra $200,000 or more that it's going to be short?
I don't believe there has been any discussion about that. That's a unique idea, and that would definitely be something to be explored in the if this gets rolled into implementation. And where we mentioned the next steps, we're exploring funding opportunities, and I think that's a question that could definitely be asked at that point. But we did not explore that during this study.
Okay.
And one thing I'll just add in there is that that's not a method of funding I've seen for bike share systems. One thing we do that gets at that a bit is the station sponsorship idea, which is considered in the study. And we have found that successful in a lot of places, that the local businesses or business association or whoever's nearby often get together in station one or a number of stations, and that can help foot the bill. In terms of the property value question, there are some studies showing that bike share stations directly increase property values. That's only been shown in a few cities, so I'm hesitant to transfer that over, and I haven't seen a study with a city similar to Billings yet. But that is definitely there. Many people expect that does transfer to any system.
Yeah, thank you. And Mayor, if you don't mind, I got another question for Chris.
Sure. We'll try to make this a wrap up, and we'll move on and take our break. Go ahead.
Thank you. Chris, Mac mentions things about next steps. What do you want to see from the council on this particular report for next steps? I mean, Missoula cut theirs, kind of tabled it, and it's done. There's issues that we talked about, but what would you like to see council do for next step now that we've seen this report?
Well, thanks, Roy, and I feel a little bit guilty doing this, but I have the question for Elise. I think we're set for adoption next week, but I wanted to maybe summarize, if you could, Elise, what adoption means, because it doesn't mean, we're going to go out to bid on implementing a program. Can you just summarize kind of what adoption of the plan does for us to help us kind of lay the groundwork if and when in the future this either comes to us or we decide to be proactive about implementing some kind of program in partnership or on our own?
Yes, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Mayor and Council. Yeah, that's a perfect explanation. So right now we are adopting the document. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this document went through our MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization process. And so as part of that process, we bring the document to our technical advisory committee. the planning board, obviously city council and the county commissioners, and then the policy coordinating committee is the last body to vote on it. So each body in that process is forwarding a recommendation to the policy coordinating committee on whether or not they should adopt the study. And you're exactly right, Chris, is that adopting the study doesn't mean that we're going to implement bike share tomorrow. This is a framework so that we know what's possible in Billings and also what would work well. We obviously wouldn't want to do something that worked really well in a big city but wouldn't work well in Billings. So that was our idea, was to figure out something that'll work well here for the future to implement. And I don't know if Wyeth has anything he wants to add to that comment.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. If I might, just really briefly, because Elise is right on with what she's saying. I think, again, just to reiterate, the whole goal with this study was kind of twofold. It was one, that we'd been approached by outside entities that were interested in coming to Billings, and this was a couple of years ago. This plan has been in the process and in our work program since our 2019 work program. So we were responding to that, and we're concerned, to some of the council members' points, we were concerned about, scooters being strewn all over the place and right-of-way encroachments and blocking and stuff. And so part of this was really to get ready and understand the mechanics of how these bike share and scooter share programs work, so we would be ready if we were approached. And then also if there were other opportunities, which we have learned more about with this study out there, in terms of how you might partner with the program, whether the city would be more involved or less involved and stuff like that. So it's really gotten us ready to be able to be prepared for either being approached from the outside or exploring opportunities and finding things that we could do with the city itself and with partners within Billings. So it's gets us set up for that. And that's exactly why this was done, was to be ready.
And thank you, Mayor. To summarize, then next steps is for adoption with recommendations. Is that, I understand? So if we want to recommend adopting this without scooters, that would be appropriate?
Okay. Yeah, I think whatever feedback you would want to weigh in as an elected body in the adoption is appropriate. And I'll just, Wyeth touched on it. If you roll back the clock a few years, I think Bozeman was one of those. I was hearing from several other city managers around the country. Some communities were very frustrated that these, particularly the scooters, started showing up all over the place, and they hadn't done any groundwork to either prohibit, manage, or kind of do it. So this really was a proactive stance, I think, by the staff dating back to before, my arrival here with the city. So thanks.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, the council members, from having read the report, you'll know that the report does leave open the theoretical possibility for scooters in some fashion, but definitely the focus is on bikes, and it's not particularly complimentary of scooters, I guess I'll put it. I don't know whether Mark or Mac, you want to follow up on that, but can you address scooters?
Yeah, sorry, Mayor. If I could just add, Councilmember Neese. Yeah, that's the report does specifically say that we recommend a hybrid bike share system with the option for scooters. A lot of times with these turnkey vendors that Mike talked about, they'll have the capacity to, they'll have scooter fleets and bike fleets, and they'll have the capacity to add that if desired. And so the reason we recommended that is just to leave some flexibility there if in the future, Billings did feel like they were ready to have scooters on their streets.
And one more point of clarification there, the scooters then would come through a city procurement process. So it wouldn't be coming as dockless scooters, dumping scooters on the streets as we saw in many cities. It would be managed through the same contract as the bikes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we would obviously have opportunity to weigh in on that. Councilor Trakey, we want to take a break, so I'm going to ask you to keep it short.
It is short. So I looked up to see what the Missoula Council did do. It was the summer of 2019, a year and a half ago, and they had actually looked at an actual ordinance in order to actually allow a private vendor to come in and establish a dockless bike and scooter system in the city. So that was a couple of steps beyond what we're talking about here. Basically, we're just saying we're still interested in the idea if we adopt this plan, as opposed to actually trying to write any specific ordinances about it. And on that, you can break for lunch.
Yeah, all right. Or at least the bathroom. So thank you, everybody. Mike, Mac, thank you for your efforts. And thank you, Council, for the discussion and for the public. With that, we'll adjourn. It's 7:59. We'll try to come back around 8:05. reconvene. Welcome back, everyone. We've concluded items 1 through 4. And so we're now on item number 5, Poly Vista Park Development Phase 1. Before I turn over to Mike Whitaker, our Parks and Recreation and Public Lands Director, I'll just comment. We did get a phone call from somebody who was trying to get in to comment on our last item. We won't reopen public comment, but there may be a considerable lag between what people are hearing and our actual meeting. It's now, for anybody who's listening, 8:06. I'm not sure exactly what that means. So what I'll do on our next 2 items is I'll open our public comment relatively early in our discussion. And that way people can call in. We may have to intersperse some public comments with our own questions or comments, but just to keep that in mind. Chris Kukulski, anything that you would like to add to this item before we turn it to Mike Whitaker?
I'm going to be extraordinarily brief, but just say, this is a significant partnership, a multi-million-dollar partnership between fundraising efforts in our community with the Land is Legacy group. And so with that, this really launches the first significant phase of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and so thank you, Mike. Take it away.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Can.
Fantastic. What you see now is the Poly Vista Park master plan. A 30% design of Poly Vista Park has been completed. Phase 1 development of Poly Vista Park is consistent with the Billings 2017 Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Plan. Public and private contracts will be used to construct Phase 1 of Poly Vista Park. The city's contract will include mass grading, paving existing parking lot, constructing accessible routes to park amenities, and replacing the 4 baseball fields manual irrigation system. The city's improvements are highlighted in the yellow areas here. Like I said before, the city's portion is to replace the manual irrigation system on these 4 fields and pave the parking lot here. The purple area you see here is the Land and Legacy's responsibility in Phase 1. The Miracle Field, or the Miracle League Field and the ADA restroom will be completed by the foundation in Phase 1 through a private contract. Phase 2 of the project will include park shelters, playground, and exercise equipment. Phase 3 will include a splash pad and a large event building, and Phase 4 will include a restroom and sidewalks for the existing 4 baseball fields. We have basically 2 options on how to move forward with Phase 1. But if we want to construct Phase 1 in 2021, we will have to do a budget amendment for design services on March 8th. Phase 1 can be constructed this year, or phase one cannot be constructed this year if we wait until after the budget is approved to hire a consultant to complete the design work. As I stated before, we've completed up to 30%, but we still need a period of time to do the rest of the design work. And staff recommends to complete a $136,335 budget amendment, so work can continue on the Poly Vista Park project. And I'm here to answer any questions that council might have.
Thank you, Mike. Let's start with some questions. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Mike, does this $136,000 come out of the $1 million, or is this an additional money?
Yes, Councilmember Boyette, it comes out of the $1 million. I apologize. I should have made that statement.
Thank you.
Councilmember Neese.
So am I clear that you're actually not asking the full $1 million to be moved up in the budget amendment, just the $136,000 for the contract?
That is correct. We just need to keep moving with the design so we can be ready to construct by the end of the summer.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Mike, what's the cost of the Miracle field approximately, and would Lens Legacy be able to start that this year as well?
Yes, they are prepared to start shortly after we start. We just have to get started a couple of weeks prior so we can do the mass grading on the site. The Land Legacy's portion of the phase one has been estimated anywhere from $861,000 to $982,000. As we work through the design, we'll be able to come up with a better number. But as of right now, they have their project will cost around $1 million.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Neese.
Mike, thank you, Mayor. Mike, do you know what what they've got raised so far now to date?
They keep talking about around 900,000.
They've got 900,000. Okay. And then, Mayor, if you don't mind, another question for Andy, or maybe Mike, you could know this too. But this 136,000. We've already got that money. I think we have a 70% reserve anyway, so that shouldn't jeopardize any other parks projects out of the PD1. Or correct? Is that right, Andy? Andy's got his thumb up. So okay, thank you, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Rewalt.
Thank you, Mayor. This 136,000, that's for the architect or the design person?
Yes, for the design and construction administration.
What do you mean construction administration?
They will supervise the construction of the two projects.
Well, you don't need that till you start working on it, which would be after budget year, right?
That is correct. But it would be simpler just to sign one contract.
So how much of the 136,000 is the construction manager?
I apologize, Councilman Ewald. I don't have that number in front of me. But the major portion of it is for the design.
And is the parks employee the construction manager?
Our park planner will oversee the project, but he will be working closely with the designer on the project, which is also responsible for the construction administration.
175,000, huh?
Hey, Mike, on that point, I'm wondering if it might not make sense to include a provision in the contract that even though you've negotiated the construction management component, that's contingent on are actually going ahead. I don't anticipate any problems with that, but technically, as Councilmember Ewell says, I suppose until that's officially the trigger's officially pulled on construction, we'd hate to have an obligation for construction that wasn't going ahead. I assume that would not be difficult to include in the contract, would it?
Mayor, it would not be difficult at all.
Okay. Other questions for staff? And here I'm going to open it up for public comment because we don't know exactly what the delay is. For anybody who would like to comment, the phone number is 237-6196. It's now 8:16. You might just look at your watch and tell me when you're hearing this, because we are kind of curious what the delay factor is. Just turn to 8:17. That number again, 237-6196. We'll continue with other staff or other questions from council members. We'll go back to Councilmember Neese, but I just want to ask if anybody else has a question before we go back to Councilmember Neese. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mike, this 136, we're simply moving that up into this year's budget rather than waiting next year's budget for the million, right? There's no additional 136 being added anywhere. We're just moving it.
Councilmember Brown, you're correct. We're just moving the $136,000 from this up and coming year to the current year.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. And I did see Denise pick up the phone. So I'm thinking that there is not such a long delay because somebody called relatively quickly. Any other questions while she puts that person on? Councilor Ewell?
Thank you, Mayor. How much of this stuff, Mike, is actually deferred maintenance and how much of it is new that's happening in phase one?
The phase one, that the city's portion is mostly deferred maintenance with some upgrades. For example, we will be paving the parking lot just from an accessibility standpoint, because that will help with the accessible route to the Miracle Field. We will be replacing the manual irrigation system out there on the 4 ball fields. And we will also be upgrading the utilities out there. The new portion, like the Miracle Field and the restroom that will accompany the Miracle Field, will be handled by Landon's Legacy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Denise, do we have a caller?
We do, Mayor, and I will put that person on. Hello, are you there? Oh, sure. Sorry.
Okay.
That caller calls back.
All right, Councilmember Neese, I think you still had something, right?
I did have a clarification. Mike, I thought I heard in your presentation that you said that Landon's Legacy is doing the course of Merker Field and the restaurants under private contract. So does that mean those jobs are not going to be going to bid under city policy, or does that mean? Can you explain what you meant by that, or did I misunderstood what you said?
The private contract, they will have the opportunity to go out and solicit their own bids for the project. We will do all the construction documents and have everything all ready, but it's up to them to find a contractor to do the work.
Okay, and so their contracts will still have the same requirements for city bonding and things like that, or liability issues, things like that. So just to make sure that down the road, if something happens, the city is protected or their work is warranted or guaranteed. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are working through that. I'm working with Andy on the boilerplate information as relates to the contract.
Okay, so the city will be be able to collect on the warranty, not the Landon's Legacy.
You mean the warranty as it relates to
any other work
bonded to complete the job?
Right.
we're still working through that, but I see it going that direction.
Okay, thank you.
And Mike, on that issue, can we assume that it's the city who decides whether the work was sufficient and meets the city standards? That's not a sign off that's left up to Land and its Legacy. It's the city's park, so the city has to approve it.
You're correct, Mayor Cole. That's the responsibility of the construction management portion of the contract that we hope to have with land design. They will ensure that everything's built to specs and drawings.
Okay, thank you very much. Denise, did we have some more callers to that phone number? If so, please feel free to put them on.
I have no more callers, but I do want to relate the question that the lady who did call, and then I either lost her or she hung up. She wanted some clarification as to where Poly Vista was located. She was concerned that it was going to be where Veterans Park is. So maybe Mr. Whitaker could explain where the location of Poly Vista Park is.
That'd be great. Mike, and then we'll look to Councilmember Brown.
Well, how about if I show my screen and bring up the park? Or share my screen. As you can see here, this is Poly Vista Park. Poly Drive is up here. And I can't see the street here, but it's right off of Poly, next to the elementary school.
At 38th.
38.
Mike?
Yes, that's correct.
You might be able to blow that up a little bit for people to see. I'm not sure if you can with your fingers on your mouse there or not, but there you go. I think it's 28 though.
You are correct.
Immediately south of Arrowhead School. Councilmember Brown, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, kind of a question, and maybe it's a little further down the road, but Mike, it looks like in phase one, the ballparks are going to be resurfaced and refixed and all of that kind of stuff so that they're usable. And then we don't have restrooms until phase 4. So are those fields going to be usable, a fair amount of time before phase 4? And if so, what's the plan? Because that park will get used for softball and things like that. I can guarantee you that.
Councilmember Brown, you are correct. It's a very busy park. We hope to use it shortly after the new irrigation system put in. Worst case scenario, we'll have a couple porta johns out there during the regular seasons until the more permanent structure gets built.
Okay.
That's what we're currently doing now.
Right. Okay.
Thank you very much. The public comment period is still open for anybody who calls 237-6196. Other questions or comments from council members? Denise, do we have anybody who's called that 237-6196?
No, Mayor, I have no more callers.
Okay, then we will go ahead and close the public comment period. And Councilmember Bernice.
Yeah, this is just one of these things where it's really nice to see a park like this start to get developed, especially with the Lands Legacy. So I'm looking forward to seeing this thing start developing and get built and be utilized. And again, hopefully used as a model for additional parks across the city where they can be all inclusive. So I look forward to that ability for this park to kind of show how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. Mike, thanks for the presentation, and thanks to Landon's Legacy and just the amazing work that they've been doing to bring this to Billings. So this kind of goes back to the last presentation. Boy, if Missoula or any other city wants to see someone taking the lead in something as spectacular as a miracle baseball field in Montana, I'm really happy it's Billings that's doing it. So super proud of our city that we are the ones taking the lead on this in the partnership with Landon's Legacy. So just wanted to share that. And Mike, thank you for all of the work your team's doing on this as well.
Thank you. I'll pass it on.
Absolutely. Other questions or comments from council members before we move on to our legislative update, item number 6? Don't see anything else. So thank you very much. We'll call that a wrap on item number 5 and move on to our legislative update, our final item of our regular agenda. Thank you, Mike, and Chris Kukulski. It's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So this week on the hearing front or testifying front has been generally slow. Wyeth did some testifying yesterday on his holiday. There's been a number of land use or planning issues that continue to kind of work their way through the process, and but he's been covering those for us. I would say they really are best described in the general sense. And I was reminded I had about an hour today with the city managers in Great Falls and in Whitefish, just how different our communities are and how important it is that we minimize the state finding these one-size-fits-all solutions for everybody and limiting us. I mean, we just don't know what the future will bring for Billings or for other communities. So in this case for Whitefish, they've literally spent years working on inclusionary zoning, spent a lot of money, a lot of time to do it right. And it looks like it's going to be pulled out from underneath of them by the state. So I just say that as we testify, we're careful there to try to retain that authority for you guys and future councils in the future. Most of our work this week really is on our LC 3265, which I do expect to turn into a House bill. As of 3:30 this afternoon, it hadn't been switched over yet. That's the bill I showed you a couple weeks ago. But we do expect it to turn into a House bill this week, and we expect the hearing to be next week. For whatever reason, I'm not sure why, either next Tuesday or Friday. So we may be 1 week away or maybe about 10 days away. So as soon as we get that information, we'll get that to you. I've reached out and asked County Attorney Twito, Sheriff Linder, as well as the chief to be ready to testify when we learn of that. And just as a reminder, again, that bill, maybe it plays itself most seemingly in the county realm because it's about moving adjudicated prisoners out of our local jail and on into state custody. But we know for us in Billings, this has a huge effect on our police department. Even though it's a county kind of responsibility for the jail, it's hugely impacting us. So,
and Chris, here, I'll just interrupt for anybody from the public who might be listening and has not been part of our previous conversations. It's a bill that would require that the Department of Corrections tell the court if it has not taken its own prisoners within 5 days. If they're in our prison or our jail for more than 5 days, DOC, Department of Corrections, has to explain why.
Thank you, Mayor. And no, I know it doesn't have a substantial amount of teeth in it, but it is moving in the right direction. We're also working actively with the governor's office and with the new Department of Corrections director, Director Gutkin, for the administrative changes that they've already started to implement and can continue to implement. So it's not just a kind of one trick there, but that really is where Amy Gramales, Greg Dorrington, our work with several representatives from around Billings to get that thing ready for its first hearing next week. And then the mayor and I, we've not finalized this, but I do think we also may be in Helena a week from yesterday in partnership or in collaboration with St. Vincent and a potential meeting with the governor there. So things are active. This week just doesn't happen to be a big week of hearings for us testifying in, but I'd be glad to answer any questions you guys have or any comments. I know several of you are involved on some bills too. So go ahead.
Councilmember Running. Questions for Chris?
Yeah, thank you. Chris, who are you expecting to carry the bill in the House, and who are you expecting to carry it in the Senate?
Thank you. So it is Representative Moore, who I think is leading on it. And then, of course, Representative Kelker, Representative Mercer, and always dangerous. I'm missing someone else who's been actively involved. And I have not gotten a name yet on the Senate side when it makes its way over there. But they were meeting this afternoon as a team with Amy and Greg to work out some of those details.
Thank you. And then, Mayor, just one follow-up question.
Please.
And then, do you have a transmittal date on that yet? Like, what's the deadline for that?
It's my understanding the reason why they're confident the hearing will be next week is essentially it's got to have its first hearing next week. So I think they're running up that 1st of March is when we run into those deadlines.
That's what I thought. All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Councilmember Tricky.
What was the number of that one again?
Right now, it's still an LC, and it's an LC 3265.
3265.
Yep.
Thank
So
you.
if you track it in the system that way, it'll show you when it flips over to a House bill.
Hey, Chris, correction there. I have a copy of what you sent, and I think it's LC 3268.
I'm sorry. You are absolutely correct. I have it written in two different ways. Here it is, 3268. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions for Chris or updates or?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Parrington, thank you.
Thank you. So, Chris, I noticed just a cursory look at some of those bills. They had to do with, and I think Sue Vinton was the sponsor of one that had to do with zoning. And I think it was still on a monitor list from the one that we got from Amy. So I'm trying to find out, I haven't contacted her to see what the implication of that is. And just as a follow-up to, you mentioned that Wyeth testified. What did he testify on and to what favor?
Yes. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Pam. He testified yesterday on Senate Bill 231. No, I'm sorry, Senate Bill 174. Revising laws related to local subdivision review. I think that's the bill that we've been concerned about on the timeline. I think they've wanted to shrink that timeline down to 35 days. And so he's been talking with them about, some of the challenges we face relative to getting those projects through the process. In some regards, we're ahead of state statutory timelines. But we'd like to have some flexibility there. But that's the bill he testified on yesterday afternoon.
So are you familiar with Sue Vinton's bill on, was it zoning? And I can't remember, there were like 3 different topics, but it had to do with zoning.
I am not real up to date on which ones specifically those are. I can certainly look into them and see. Looking back on our list, it looks like I think you had mentioned we've got it on kind of the monitor list. Is that correct? In that longer list, the group puts out each Wednesday afternoon, I think, to us Wednesday or Thursday.
Correct. That's the way I saw it. Yes.
Okay.
And I can check. I just have, this week was not a good week for me to contact people, so I can get a hold of her and find out what it is.
Okay, great. And be glad if there's any specifics we can share there.
Thank you, Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, any updates on any movement as far as additional revenue sources, availability for the city in the legislature? I know Councilman Ewald had some ideas. I think there was some work movement on the bid or the T-bid, things like that. Is there any positive movement to help relieve some of the property tax burden?
Not that I've seen in any kind of meaningful way. I mean, there's been some hearings on local option. Those were positive hearings, but frankly, we don't anticipate we'll get any real traction. Most issues around taxation have been limiting, further trying to restrict or limit it. It is the case, as I mentioned in the weekly, Senate Bill 77 did get tabled. That doesn't mean it's done and gone, but it's tabled at this point. There hasn't, I would not say, I'm not aware of any bill that we would say it has got any level of traction and would give you more tools to use to either fund or, even more importantly, as I think we've talked about, shifting more costs to users versus property owners exclusively.
Okay, thank you.
Let's open up for public comment. For anybody who might be listening who would like to weigh in on item number 6, our legislative update, same phone number, 237-6196, 237-6196. Please keep your comments to less than 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address up front. Turn off or mute your television or computer because our meeting is ahead and it'll be confusing if you're trying to listen to both. While we wait for any calls to be made, council members, anything else for in the way of questions or comments on this topic? Not seeing any. Denise, do we have anyone who's called 237-6196?
No, Mayor, I've received no calls.
Okay. If you get a call in the next few seconds, please let us know and we'll try to accommodate them. Thank you very much. We'll then close the public comment period on item number 6. And we will move on to council discussion if there's nothing further from the council. Don't see anything. So items of general council discussion before we go to public comment on non-agenda items. Council Member Neese.
I think this would be the time, Chris, where the Heights Water District should be discussed. Is that something that Gina wants to cover now in some fashion or another?
Sure, we would be happy to hit that at a high level. And in particular, I think there was kind of a question about whether the suit and countersuit, if you will, lack of a better term, maybe tie into the overall franchise fee litigation. Was, I know, one of the questions I think that's been posed. So, Gina, can you kind of highlight that? And Mayor, case, if you will, or where we are with Heights Water.
And Gina, Councilmember Neese, did you want to raise something else on?
If she could cover why we're discussing something like this in the public's forum versus our executive session.
Thank you. Gina.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, during we had our executive session earlier this afternoon to provide a litigation update report to all of you. And there is one ongoing matter that is between two public agencies. So it is an exception. It is not one of those matters that can be discussed in a closed session. So we're going to cover it briefly here. Probably won't get into depth too much, but this is just to provide you an update anyways of what's going on in the case. So the city filed a lawsuit against the County Water District of Billings Heights on December 28th. The city asserted a breach of contract claim for unpaid amounts due under the contract in the amount of $2.97 million. The case currently has been assigned to Judge Souza, and trial has been set for October 31st, 2022. There have been some deadlines scheduled, and one of those deadlines is the discovery will end May of 2022. So the County Water District has made some counterclaims, and first of all, the County Water District has denied that it owes the city any additional money in its answer to the city's complaint. The County Water District asserted counterclaims against the city for negligence and for collection and declaratory judgment and for the refund of $1.255 million of franchise fees that it claims that it paid to the city. However, the city's records indicate that the fees at issue appear to be less than $50,000. So that claim does not appear to have much merit. That is currently where we're at. The city has served discovery requests on the county. It did that at the same time it filed a complaint. Once we receive some answers, the city will then determine how to move forward in determining what kinds of motions to file, if those will be motions for summary judgment or otherwise. The city has some defenses that it will be pursuing in this matter, and that's pretty much the status and as in-depth as I think would be appropriate to go.
Okay, thank you very much for that update, Gina. Councilmember Brown, you want to follow up there?
Thank you, Mayor. Gina, can you clarify Heights, Water, and County, and what does county mean in this particular situation?
Yes. So and Chris, you may want to jump in and help me here. At very basic level, I can give you a description. The municipal water, we provide wholesale water to the county water district, and for a lot of those consumers are in city limits, but some of them are outside of city limits. That county water district was established long ago. I'm not even sure when that was, but it has since grown. It provides water that the wholesale water that we provide to them, they have their own consumers established under that district.
And I think what I would add is maybe a confusing thing because of the name county. I think the Heights Water, what we're talking about, the one and the same thing, Heights Water District, and maybe this formal name of the county district detail. It is not under the purview of the Yellowstone County Commissioners any more or less than it's under the purview of the city of Billings. It's an independent, separate entity of which statutorily the county commissioners get to appoint one board member, we get to appoint one board member, and then they have elected board members. So that really is that independent, separate district there. If that answers your question, Councilmember Brown, in kind of clarification.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. It was just a little confusing talking county, Heights Water, all of that. So thank you very much for that clarification.
The only other thing I guess I'd like to just mention that I kind of forgot to mention is that the city is, we will continue to attempt to settle this matter. We have tried to do that previously. There was a mediation. It did not result in a settlement, but we are continuing to pursue settlement discussions with council, with the Heights Water District Council. And so that whether they're willing to engage in those negotiations or discussions is yet to be seen, but we are attempting to do that. Just wanted to make sure you all were aware of that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Since this item is not on the agenda, I'd recommend that we not get any deeper, but Chris, did you have anything else before we move on?
I guess the only thing I'd like to do, just be kind of for that purpose, for anyone who might be watching, is just really provide a high-level summary, right? So, and I will send out to you guys this evening the summarization of the kind of the issues around this case. It's a one-pager. And the bottom line is, the city did have an error. It had an error when it updated its software for its billing system. The good news is that billing error, that software error, was only literally affected 1 meter of the literally thousands of meters in the system. The meter for Heights Water District calculates on a different equation. That error was not discovered for a few years, and it resulted in several $1 million worth of water of value. And we've been trying to settle the dispute, as Gina has said. In fairness, we've been trying to settle it with them and for them to pay us over the same time period that it took us to figure out the error as potentially a fair way to do this. We see the Heights Water District as long-term partners. We're not competitors. They serve water to literally tens of thousands of residents who live within the city limits of Billings. So we'd like to resolve this in partnership with them. We tried to mediate it, as was said, and unfortunately we just got nowhere. So we really did feel it was a last resort to take this step, but we've not given up on some type of a settlement, a resolution that is fair to all of our 110,000 ratepayers or citizens, not simply one group kind of getting an advantage over an error from others. And I'll just summarize this last statement. We believe, had we overbilled them, we should refund them. And that's kind of how I look at this in this regard. We underbilled them. There's no dispute that they received the water, sold the water to their customers, and used the water. And so we just want the fair price back for it. So that's a really high level summarization, and I'll send you the written one-pager later this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else before we go to public comment on non-agenda items? Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess this might be for Gina. Is what can we do now that we, the mayor and the council have okayed Jeff Engel as our representative for the city, and Heights Water refuses to seat him? What can we do? Can we go to the state attorney general, Austin Knudsen, and beg for him to make them follow state statute, or are we going to have to sit and wait to the late date of October 2022 to get all this stuff resolved?
Well, I mean, I think that you do have options. I mean, we could certainly pursue something in court. That would just be that. I mean, that's a consideration. That's something you guys have to think about. We could certainly file, for example, like requesting a writ of mandate. That's something that could be an option. Litigation, of course, is costly and time consuming and takes up resources, but that's an option. With regard to, I think you mentioned the Attorney General. I'm not exactly familiar with what you might be suggesting, but I'm happy to explore some options there as well.
That would probably be good to get him involved and just see what his take is on it, because if they're not following state statute, I don't understand why we have to sue them to get something solved when
they're their own. They're their own agency. The Attorney General doesn't have the authority to make them do something, much like he couldn't come in and make you all do something.
Okay.
Councilmember Bernice, and just a reminder that this item is not on our agenda, and the public doesn't know we're having this discussion, so I'd like to move on. But Councilmember Bernice?
Well, I think that's part of our council discussions. I don't know if we put something like that on the agenda, but if we do have to put that, I guess we could put it on there. I guess I won't belabor the Heights Water District anymore, but I did have a question. I think we had talked about trying to address what the legislator hasn't done yet on the marijuana that's coming to the city. What does the council want to start doing to try to make sure we're regulating that prior to, because we are a self-governing city. So what do we as a council want to start doing on that to try and protect and find the locations, things like that on it?
Chris, that's really part of the legislative update. You want to go back to that item, and do you have some thoughts, or do we have any updates? Or if we can't do it this time, maybe soon we could get some input on that issue. Certainly an important one.
Yeah, I really don't have anything of substance for the legislative update relative to it. It is a part of the discussion. It's even maybe more directly and been a part of the governor's budget relative to using revenue collected from recreational marijuana for drug courts and other alternative ways to help addiction issues, which the Yellowstone Substance Abuse Connect strongly supports, and I think we do as a city as well. I think for us, and why I've got it listed on your draft 2021-22 priorities, is that we need to take the time to do some analysis of land use regulations and the anticipated financial cost of marijuana being legalized, both for recreational and medical. So again, I don't have answers for you tonight, but that's why it's there on that list as priorities for your consideration for us to get serious about here this coming year in potential local regulations, as well as asking the state to please make sure they reinvest any revenues received into treatment, into the impacts of marijuana legalization.
So if I may, Mayor, to follow up on that.
Go ahead, and then Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. So I'm assuming that we need to get the planning department involved with their new recode. We need to make amendment to the recode. Is there anything we need to do maybe with finance and business licenses that we should start working on and start planning? I mean, what kind of staff do you think you need to mobilize to try to get going after this before it gets too far ahead of us?
You know, I certainly think there's a very significant policy issue for the council to answer, which is are you going to prohibit or are you going to regulate? And if it's prohibit, there's not a lot of work that needs to be done to put something, it's not that hard to put something pretty straightforward as to prohibition. If you want to regulate, which is what some cities have chose to do, I think, yes, we've got to put some resources and time in our community development office, maybe even consulting and legal to do that. And we can't take, I would plead with us, we can't take years to do that. If we want to have an impact, we need to put something in place. We need to formulate your policy direction and get it adopted. Because I fear it'll come at us fast if once legalization kind of fully takes hold.
So am I missing? I thought the medical marijuana we could prohibit, but I didn't think the recreational was something that could be prohibited. I thought that was a matter of law now.
Gina, can you help me out there? Thank you.
I can. Thank you. Yes, Council Member Neese, you're correct. That's why I popped up here. I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page. I think Chris maybe was just referring to the medical marijuana. And you're right, the legislation with regard to the recreational marijuana provides that local governments can regulate, but prohibition can only occur upon an election. That has the qualified electors have to pass that in order to prohibit it. So you can, yeah, I'm sorry, what's that?
That's prohibit the medical or the recreational?
I'm sorry, recreational. Recreational, you have the authorization to regulate the recreational, but you cannot prohibit the recreational. That has to go to the electors to decide.
Because if
I'm gonna move on. I recognize Councilmember Shaw, so go ahead, Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So yes, this is an extremely important conversation. It's why I've been trying to bring a medical marijuana initiative before council for a year. Finally, we've got the legal go-ahead to do so. So I am officially telling council I will be bringing that forward this Monday as an initiative. It will be very broad. I'll work with Chris on the language to have it fit in with our priorities, but the goal is really to say, this is the first step of the process and we need to pick a policy direction. Are we moving in the direction of regulation? If we are, then I think we give the ball to Chris, and that's when, to me, he can answer all of those questions of, I need these staff members, I need this information. But if the answer is no, then that's also important for staff. And I think none of us want to waste a bunch of staff time and hours on any of this, but I do think this is a very important conversation to get rolling. So Monday, and I will get that sent out to council in the next couple of days. Thanks.
Thank you very much,
Mr.
Councilmember
Bear.
Shaw. And just to clarify, Councilmember Shaw, that's just dealing with the medical marijuana component. Yes. Okay. I'm going to recognize Councilmember Ewald, and I heard Councilmember Purington's voice, I believe. So, or Councilmember Ewald, I believe Councilmember Purington had her hand up probably beforehand. So let's do that in reverse. Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Frank. So I had sent an email to Chris. I guess it was on the 13th, and I was asking him these very questions about what we can do as a council if the council needs to drive this initiative, or does the or does the council do it, or does the staff do it? How do we figure out who does it? Because it does involve legal, it does involve planning because of the zoning issues. And so I see a lot of things that we can do to regulate. And so I think that's something that we need to get ahead of instead of wait, and have it dictated to us, I guess to say. So I think it would be a good idea for us to start working on that. And I don't know how to get started on it. I really don't. And I don't know what the legislature is doing with it either. So I guess I need some guidance, and, I guess if the council wants to move forward with it, then whether or not we pick some people to get together, or if we just put it out there and give it to legal and they start drawing it up, I don't know. So you guys need to let me know.
Chris, feel free if you've got some general observations there, and then we'll recognize Councilmember Ewald, or you could say we'll deal with that after there's initiative, but it's up to you, Chris.
I would simply say the overarching policy direction is what really the staff needs to hear. And it'll just be, the clearer you can be, the easier it is for Gina and I and Wyeth to move forward in that regard. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Ewald, Councilmember Boyette, and Councilmember Treaky.
I'll defer to Councilmember Boyette if he's on the same subject, because I'm going to change it.
Okay, let's stick with the regulation of marijuana releases for a while. Councilmember Boyette and Treaky.
So, Gina, if you're saying that we have no option but to regulate the recreational marijuana, then that decision's already made for you then, Chris.
Well, I heard that there is one option, which is, Gina, help me out here if I get it wrong, and because I misspoke earlier. One option could be that you want to take it to the elector, the voters, and you want to, I'm assuming you could pass an ordinance, put a question on the ballot for the voters to say, we're going to prohibit it in Billings, Montana. That is an option, but you don't have the control to finalize it. Only the electors have the ability to finalize it. Other direction, you don't need that permission from the public if you want to regulate. We can do that piece apparently without a vote of the public, but through your standard processes of ordinances, public hearings, that route.
Gina, can you comment? We'll go to Councilmember Treaky on that. This cries out for something in writing about all of this, but go ahead, Gina.
Yeah, I think that Chris recited that correctly. The council can enact some regulation with regard to various things. As long as it has to do with public health, safety, and welfare requirements, and that would deal with zoning, inspections, things like that. I can look a little closer at the legislation. If I recall, I believe that the electors may request an election. I'm not sure that you can put it on, can create the initiative, but I will look at the legislation a little bit closer. So, I think we are looking at needing to enact some regulation if that's how you choose to proceed. It probably would be a good idea to wait for the legislative session to end. I haven't followed everything that's going on, given my current staffing situation, but it's my understanding that there has been a lot of legislation proposed regarding the recreational marijuana, and I don't know what's out there, but I think that there will be some. So it's probably a good idea to wait for that legislation to be all finished so that we can determine which way and how to proceed.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Trickey and Councilmember Ewalt.
Ms. Dahl just kind of said the main point that I was going to say. I think it's important for us to come up with a general idea of where we want to go. But I did a quick look on the Montana legislative page of the number of bills, looking for the number of bills with marijuana in the name, and it was over 20. So I don't think we should go into any detail on and spend any staff time on anything until we see how the legislature decides to go on this. But general conversation about what we want to do, yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Ewalt.
Thank you, Mayor. About a year ago, everything was hot and heavy about public safety and budget and all that. And it was brought up about impact fees. When a new house gets built, should we start charging them a fee to help support fire stations? Because we don't need them more fire stations if it doesn't expand outside the area we're in right now. So I was wondering if anything was done on that. Plus also, it was also talked about quite a bit, multiple calls to the same place or whatever, or and charge a service charge for some of the emergency calls we have. Has anything been done on either of those? Because budget talks is coming up again real soon.
So I can tell you that system development charges is on the list of priorities for your consideration, and that's what that is, at least on the police and fire side, as well as other components. So it's there. It's not something you budgeted for this year to cover the cost of, to follow statute requires an analysis there. But you first need to make the policy decision. Yes, we want to go there. So that kind of covers the first one. The second one, I can tell you, when you get the CPSM report, you will see right there, false alarms or something on the police side that they recommend we put some policy in place on, because we are spending time there. I will be very, very surprised if we don't see the same thing on the fire report. We haven't seen that fire report yet. So specific to answer your question, Frank, that's why I have on your proposed priorities, those system development charges. The proposed budget will need to include money to fund each area that you want to consider a system development charge or an impact fee for. By statute, has to be well studied and thought out and analyzed so that that system development charge is absolutely proportional to the impact. So you guys will be in the driver's seat as to whether you budget for that work or not. And then on the policy side, it's not some costly policy to change what we do relative to alarms. And March 1, just as a reminder, March 1 is all kind of criminal justice night on reviewing the survey you've got. I hope you've been reading that survey in detail. And we're going to get you a CPSM report so you can start reading the couple hundred pages there. Most of it's operational, but you're going to figure out pretty quickly what the resource need is. And you guys are in the driver's seat on the resource side of it. So
thank you very much. Chris, go ahead, Frank.
So you're saying that they're recommending that we start charging for service calls because of the numbers of them?
They're recommending that we adopt a policy for false alarms, that we are spending some, there are resources being spent there, and we don't have we need to update our policy relative to false alarms.
Chris, on impact fees, Public Works, as I recall, was very serious about trying to get a green light on impact fees for stormwater development, I believe. Is that still moving forward?
So it is my understanding that is a part of the stormwater analysis that's happening. And though we call them a different name, you already have them in place for water and wastewater. So you don't have stormwater, police, fire, streets, but we do have them for water, wastewater. And you're correct, I believe, Mayor, the stormwater analysis will include how to have the growth pay more of that stormwater impact rather than all of us paying for that stormwater impact exclusively.
Okay, thank you very much. Council, we still haven't had public comment on non-agenda items, so I'm going to move to that item. If you are listening out there, the phone number for anything that was not on our agenda tonight that you'd like to comment on is 237-6196. Please call that number immediately if you would like to comment. 237-6196 is our final item, opportunity for public comment before we adjourn tonight. And this is the opportunity for something that was not on our agenda this evening. That number again, 237-6196. Reminder to please keep your comments to less than 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address up front. And please turn off or mute your screen because our meeting is ahead of what you're hearing and it's very confusing if you don't do that. The number again, 237-6196 for any public comment on a non-agenda item. Denise, do we have anyone who's called 237-6196 to comment on something that was not on our agenda tonight?
No, Mayor, I've received no callers.
Okay, then I'm going to close our public comment period on non-agenda items. And I'm going to say good night. Council? See you in 6 days.